Hello and welcome to this meeting on a lovely sunny Thursday, 21st of September 2023. Good evening. Welcome to this meeting on Thursday, the 21st of September 2023. I'm Councillor Steph Nissen. I'm a councillor for Castle Ward and I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. This meeting is being held in the Grand Jury Room in the Town Hall in Colchester and is also being broadcast live over the internet, where it can be watched by the Council's YouTube channel, where the recording will be available to view afterwards. Please, would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone. I think we're having a slight technical issue. One moment, please. Testing, testing.
You just give it a minute while I connect up.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Councillor. Testing, testing. Testing 1, 2.
It's kind of breaking. You're coming through and then you're fading, so it's almost like there's a try. Can you try us again, please, Chair?
So, hello, Councillor. We're just doing an audio check. Is that clear? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sure is.
Extremely. Okay. So, if the committee doesn't mind, I suggest you all talk really close to the microphone and avoid turning your head left and right, because the closer you are to the microphone, the better the chance it will pick you up. Apologies and thank you.
Appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know who I am, you know the date, and you know why we're here. Actions in the event of an emergency. There are no practice alarms planned for this evening, so if an alarm sounds, please evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the town hall in Runwald Street. Councillors and officers taking part in the meeting are requested to mute their microphones when not speaking. Please activate the microphone when invited to speak and turn it off again when you have finished speaking. For clarification, it is the button on the right. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access the meeting papers. Visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent and do not use voice or camera flash functions. Thank you. The provisions in the Constitution around the timing of breaks will apply to this meeting. Consideration will be given to have a break at 7:30, depending on the items of business remaining. I will now ask members of the committee and attending officers to introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew Tyrrell, Head of Public Protection for Colchester City Council.
Thank you, Councillor Leslie Scott-Buchel, Stanway Board.
Ben Plummer, Climate Emergency Officer, Colchester City Council.
Simon Davison, Sustainability and Climate Change Manager.
Fiona Shipp, Parks, Countryside and Greening Operations Manager for Colchester City Council.
David Carter, Parks and Open Spaces Improvement Officer for Colchester City Council.
Councillor Tracy Arnold for Stanway Ward.
Pam Cox, Councillor for Newtown and Christchurch Ward.
Councillor Mark Gocher, Castle Ward.
Councillor Andrew Ellis, Councillor for Markstay and Layer Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Dundas, Tiptree Ward.
Councillor Natalie Summers, St Anne's and St John's Ward.
Councillor Powling, Mersey and Pyfleet Ward. Councillor Kayleigh Rippingale, representing Newtown and Christchurch.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much, everyone. Item 2 on the agenda is substitutions. We have Councillor Powling, who is substituting for Councillor Lismore. Welcome, Councillor Powling. And we have Councillor Scott Butell, who is substituting for Councillor Moffat. Welcome, Councillor Scott Butell. Item 3, there are no urgent items to... Excuse me. My apologies, sincere apologies. We also have Councillor Rippingale, who is substituting for Councillor Bloomfield this evening. Welcome, Councillor Rippingale. And there are no urgent items this evening to be added to the agenda. I would now invite any panel members, all panel members, to declare any relevant interests, please. None disclosed? That's fantastic. Thank you very much. So, item 5, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 23rd of June 2023. I'm asking the panel to approve the minutes from its meeting on the 23rd of June 2023. There's a typo in my notes. The panel is reminded that the minutes are referred for approval only, and no matters arising which are not published on the agenda should be raised at this time. All in favour? Agreed? Thank you. That's carried. Okay, moving on to item 6, have your say, public engagement. Members of the public are very welcome at the meeting. Thank you for coming along tonight. It's good to see you all, particularly in this less than clement weather. You're invited to address the panel under the Have Your Say provisions, and I would endeavour to ask officers to respond to any of your comments made. There's no provision for continuing public engagement throughout the meeting. The panel will discuss the information that's been presented in reports on the agenda, and public interaction is not permitted during these discussions, but you are very welcome to remain, stay and observe the meeting after the Have Your Say section is completed. So first on my list of people who wish to address the panel, I have Mr. Stephen Vince. Would you like to come forward? Please use the microphone. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, then you'll be given a response to your comments, and then you'll have a further 1 minute in response to that. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stephen Vince, a villager from West Mersey and an acknowledged member of the Open Space Society. I was asked by the statutory authority for village greens in the parish, West Mersey Town Council, to have signs made for Village Green 241 Coast Road, West Mersey. Local city ward councillors paid for the signs from city funding. The owners of Village Green 241 South is the city, who are aware they are breaching the Commons Act, Enclosure Act and the Countryside Act, which is a criminal offence. Despite endless letters to the Chief Executive and the monitoring officers, I cannot get a reply from the city for an update as to what action has been taken to uphold the law. Plus, the city-funded Village Green sign needs to be erected. Again, the cooperation of the city is required. Village Green 241 North has been erected. Again, could the city please give us an update? Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vince. I'm going to hand that over to Simon Davidson, if you wouldn't mind a quick response. But alternatively, if you feel Democratic Services is more appropriate, we can go that way. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Matthew, can I ask you to respond on that matter?
Yes, Chair, I think this is something that we need to take up out of the meeting. We have Mr. Vince's details to let him know of an update, so if we can carry that forward with officers with your approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vince. Officers will be in touch with you no later than 7 working days. Thank you for your contribution. Next on my list, I have Gillian Mockridge. I hope I've said their name correctly there. Please use a microphone. You have 3 minutes to speak and then a further minute to respond to any other comments made. Thank you.
Wheelie bins for garden refuse. This is a double taxation on gardening. We already pay for it as part of the council tax, which no doubt will still go up. I am not aware that any public consultation was ever made when the decision to charge was taken in February. It discriminates against people with gardens, which are increasingly important for the environment and people's physical and mental well-being. This is not a small charge of, say, £10 a year. It will cost, to start with, £90 per bin, the capacity of which is a lot smaller than 4 garden waste bags. Even a modest garden will need 2 bins. Garden bags are 99% fit for purpose, except when they are dropped after being emptied and the wind takes them away. They are easier to store when not in use, unlike wheelie bins, which in some parts of Colchester would be left outside on the pavement 24/7, causing a dangerous hazard to passers-by. Bags are much easier to move about the garden, especially if, like me, your garden is on different levels, 6 feet above. It will be impossible to safely take a bin up to the top level. Wheelie bins are difficult for the elderly and infirm to handle, especially on slopes and up and down steps. Hedges, etc., will not be pruned, blocking alleyways and pavements, and fly tipping will increase. When the garden bags were introduced, the compost was going to be made into soil improver and sold to members of the public. What happened to this idea? Why isn't it marketed at local garden centres? Bags allow air to decaying compost, aiding the process, which is far better than any enclosed bin. This will become putrid and stink, making it difficult to clean. You are reinventing the wheel, making it square and charging a high cost for this impractical method. And I cannot see in this current financial climate too many people registering to pay for bins. Thank you very much for listening.
That is absolutely fine, Mrs. Mockridge, and can I say thank you very, very much for your comments there. I note and respect your concerns there. On that matter, I'm going to ask Rosa Tanfield, the lady who's just joined the table to my left, who is our Head of Waste and Recycling, to respond to your comments there. But thank you very much for raising those key points.
Okay, thank you for raising that. So I'm going to try and cover off some of the elements that you spoke about. But before I do, I can assure you that the decision to introduce garden waste charging has not been an easy one. You mentioned the financial climate, and this council faces those same very difficult financial climate that we ourselves as residents face as well. We're seeing an unprecedented budget gap in terms of the income that the council is able to generate versus the cost of providing all of the essential services that we do. And so in February this year, Cabinet, who make the decisions on the financial situation and how the council will serve its residents in the future, had to make the very difficult decision on a whole raft of different saving schemes and income generating opportunities. When looking at garden charging, there were a number of options that were explored, one of which would have been to stop the garden waste collection in its entirety and therefore not collecting garden waste at all from residents. The alternative, obviously, was to look at charging, but if we weren't able to do either of those and wanted to continue garden charging, we'd have to look at stopping other services that the council provides, such as stopping or closing leisure centres. So to put the context, that's the difficult position that the council faced itself in, and made that decision to introduce garden charging. Very similar to lots of other authorities, not only in Essex but across the UK, and markedly, at least 65% of councils excuse me, in the UK currently charge. Now, whilst the council is going to offer that garden waste collection charge, it's an opt-in, so not all residents will choose to opt in. There are residents that currently don't have gardens, have very small gardens, choose to do composting and other ways. And residents will have the opportunity to choose how they want to dispose of their garden waste. And you've mentioned about composting, etc., and we'll be encouraging that. And we're going to, as part of the rollout of this scheme, we'll be providing lots of training opportunities to help residents understand how to compost, because it's not as straightforward as chucking your grass in a bin. But also we have a special deal with Love Essex and getcomposting.com, so we can offer discounts on composters as well. Just to come back on the point in terms of wheeled bins, because that's the other area of concern for you. Again, wheeled bins is something, again, lots of authorities provide. And one of the key reasons for us wanting to provide wheeled bins is to support our staff, our incredibly hardworking frontline staff who walk literally miles every day and collect tons and tons of waste. Wheel bins will support them in their day-to-day delivery. But also the footprint of a wheeled bin is much smaller than a garden sack. And you've mentioned already when they blow away and the cost associated with replacing those bags. Now, I realise as well in our communities there are those that will find it difficult. They find it difficult with bags and they will find it difficult with wheeled bins. Already the council provides assisted collection service, so all you have to do is contact us either online or speak to our customer service team, and our staff will come out and do a visit and explore with the resident what their challenges are with managing their waste. And what we can do is then offer an assisted collection, which basically means they can just leave their bins where they are and we will go and collect them and deal with them. So if there's steps to deal with or slopes to deal with, if that resident's really struggling, we will be able to provide that service free as part of what we do. And we do that for our refuse collection and our recycling currently already. Where are we? Have I covered everything there? Is there something I've missed? Sorry.
No, that was very comprehensive, Rosa. Thank you. I'd like to ask Mrs. Mockridge if you'd like to respond on that. You've got a minute, please.
I do. It doesn't show very much, but I do actually have cerebral palsy. And I will find it very hard with a wheelie bin. And I am very vehemently independent. I don't have any help from anybody. And I would not want to contact you for assisted collection. It's against what I cope with. I think I shall have to continue using the bags and somehow empty the bags into the bin, because I can't get about my garden with a wheelie bin. That's just not practical. And they are smaller. You are going to be paying more for less. Yeah, it isn't. It's not a fair thing. I realise your situation, but then people who are trying to pay their mortgage won't want to be paying for a bin either. The council's in the same position, but lots of people are also in that position. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Rosa to just come back on that point if you're able to stay there for another minute.
It was just one further point that I completely missed in terms of the cost as well. So in terms of options, again, for residents, they can share. So if there are a number of residents that, might find it difficult or don't fill a bin, there are a number of... Yeah, so a number of residents could collectively say, do you know what, we'll share a bin or share the cost. The other thing that I didn't mention as well, which has now been agreed as well, is those residents who are on local council tax support will have the joining cost will be free, so they'll only have to pay the annual cost. So again, the council has identified and acknowledges that people are going to find this difficult and are trying to find the ways that will help and support them. So that's a new development in the last few weeks that we're pleased to be able to offer residents as well.
Thank you very much, Rosa, and thank you again very much for coming in, Mrs. Mockridge. Really appreciate your contribution. So next we have Corinna Cooper. Miss Cooper, if you want to come up. 3 minutes, please use the microphone, and then you'll have the chance to respond afterwards. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm here to discuss your email response regarding the danger of EVs. Referring us to trading standards is an inadequate response considering the severity of the fire hazard. The national press reports that a record number of e-bike and e-scooter fires have been recorded this year. The charity Electrical Safety First estimates that a fully charged e-bike battery can explode with the same energy as 6 hand grenades. Council has the duty of care to the public and has previously been giving notice of negligence with respect to dangerously cluttering the streets with devices that are not only a trip hazard but also have well-evidenced explosive fire risk. When will Council address their now grossly negligent position? Other local residents have also not been properly responded to. Climate Emergency Officer Ben Plummer is yet to answer a Freedom of Information request from the 26th of June to explain what the exact parameters of the climate emergency are. Reminder emails were sent on the 3rd and 25th of July. Another request on the 25th of July asking if Council receives any financial or other benefits from the e-bikes and scooters has been completely ignored. We're also awaiting the evidence the Council used for their decision to declare a man-made climate emergency when neither the IPCC nor UK Government has formally declared one. Regardless of personal beliefs, you must provide evidence-based, unbiased decision-making by looking at all the available evidence. Simon Davison, Sustainability and Climate Change Manager, has confirmed this has not been done. When will it be? This lack of response, combined with blinkered, non-evidence-based decision-making, does not instil any faith in our Council. It's entirely forgivable that Council may not have originally understood the horrific environmental harms caused by the production of EVs and the dangers they present. But now you do, we cannot forgive or accept this continued willful negligence. The Council has a duty to the public to be transparent and accountable, especially when public money is being spent. If you cannot show evidence for your decision-making and spending, as has been pointed out in numerous emails, this is a misappropriation of public funds. And just in case you are unaware, you are individually liable, and misconduct in public office can result in life imprisonment. The public are not going to stand for Council ignoring them. Council's obligation is solely to the public, and the public will take whatever action is necessary to ensure that Council decisions are serving all the public. We need to have a public meeting in the Town Hall to discuss these matters fully. Provide a date. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Cooper. I was just writing lots of that down to try and make sure that I'm addressing those points. I'll start at the end, if I may. In regards to the Town Hall public meeting, I'm going to ask Democratic Services to look into that and get back to me within 7 working days. Again, that's a clear timescale, not an attempt to fob you off, I assure you. Yeah, excuse me, sorry. Yes, we need to look into that and we need to come back on that. So that's 7 working days, please, Matthew. Thank you. With regards to your comment about Ben, as Ben is present this evening, I'd like to give Ben the opportunity to respond if you feel. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I think the comment directly addressed at me about the Freedom of Information Act. I know I did respond to the Freedom of Information Act. The resident who submitted the FOI then responded to my answer to the Freedom of Information Act, and therefore it wasn't submitted as a formal Freedom of Information request. Therefore, there was no reason why I needed to respond to that follow-up email, is all that I would say. I think there was reference made to spending as well, which was again submitted by the same resident in a Freedom of Information request. And a response was also provided to that as well, detailing that the question was not specific enough and would have taken too much officer time for us to produce a detailed and specific enough response to the question. So it was said that you could look at the council statement of accounts, or you could reword the question again and come back with something more specific.
Just before you respond, Ms Cooper, I want to make sure that all the points that you raised are addressed, so I'm jumping in here. Apologies. I'd like to ask Simon to respond to the comment that was made regarding you, if you feel comfortable to, please.
Sorry, which particular comment?
The comment with regards to you acknowledging that the council wasn't taking a form of action that had been requested.
I believe I responded in detail in the email that I sent. I was then sent a response by the person who asked the original email and have yet not responded to that email. However, I could not see any further question in it, so I believe that response has already been made.
Thank you, Simon. With regards to, sorry, I can't remember my own writing this evening. With regards to your comment about the council's obligation to the public, yes, it is. No debate, no discussion on that point. We're here to serve the public. We represent the public and we operate as a local authority for the residents of Colchester and the areas. With regards to the comment you made about misconduct in office, I do take that very, very seriously, and I would urge either yourself or any other members of the public who think misconduct in office is occurring to address the monitoring officer, who is a gentleman by the name of Andrew Weavers. He is the monitoring officer and the head of governance, and it's his responsibility, one of his responsibilities, is to look into any complaints about councillor conduct. So he would be the appropriate person to address on that point. Is there anything that you feel that...
Sorry, I hadn't explicitly been identified an officer who will be accountable for these decisions on the EVs. So I'll just continue my minute rather than jumping backwards.
Yes, that's fine.
Is that
Thank
right?
you.
So it's not just us that are saying EVs are dangerous. You know, public transports are banning them because they are, and the response we got from your email saying, well, you know, so do combustion engines. You know, there's a difference here with the explosive nature of these fires, and I don't think the hazard of them are being taken seriously. So that's where I'm identifying gross negligence going on, because we have identified these. And in fact, recently there was a tragedy in Cambridge where a mum, 2 children and 2 dogs had died because of an e-bike battery. So just take a moment to think how you'll feel when someone is injured from an EV. How are you going to feel when one explodes, maiming or killing a child, or anyone for that matter? And it's not a matter of if, is it? It's a matter of when. Colossal money is being spent on very questionable net zeros initiatives, and if you are here to serve the public, then the public is requesting this debate at the town hall. We feel that consultation has been inadequate, and where council's guidance is on consultation process and all these things, we just don't feel we're being heard. We need a public debate. We need to bring information to the table. Things as simple as CO2 is plant food. Let's get that as low as possible. What's that going to do the plants? So can we have open debate with scientists that aren't paid by corporate interests? Thank you very much.
So with regards to that, thank you. Again, thank you very much for coming in this evening and making those points. And I will ensure that there is a response on that. Sorry, excuse me, tripping over my tongue. I will make sure that we look into this within 7 working days of this evening. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you and apologise. When I wrote this speech, I hadn't received the email that you responded in 7 days. So you got away with that one. I was going to verbally spank you for not getting in touch. So my apologies, but I'll chase up why I haven't received the email and see if we can have a discussion and get to the bottom of these problems, because they're not going away. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to invite Alan Short to address the panel now, please. Please use the microphone. You have 3 minutes to speak. A bell will indicate when you've got 1 minute remaining. Then officers will respond to you and you'll have a further minute to respond after that. Thank you.
Good evening. I don't agree with much of what the last speaker said, incidentally, except for the danger from batteries. I'm here to talk about the local plan. It now seems likely that the Middlewick Ranges will be sold and that there will be a developer seeking... I could shout a bit more. The Wick, the Middlewick Ranges are about to be sold, and there are discussions taking place between the developer, the planning officers, Essex County Council, and presumably somebody from the borough, the city. Sorry, the conditions that permitted the inclusion of the Wick for 1,000 houses in the local plan, laid down by the inspector, when he looked at them, were quite extensive. They talked about conditions that were needed to protect the existing environment and further conditions that needed to be met by replacing the existing environment with similar things in other locations, and that these were to be paid for by the developer. My question is, will this Environment and Sustainability Committee be monitoring those conditions during the drawing up of the plans and making sure that those conditions are met in any development that is agreed?
Thank you very much, Mr. Short. Excellent question. So in terms of the remit of the Environment and Sustainability Panel, our role is to make recommendations to Cabinet. And I think that would be a valid recommendation to take forward and have discussions with Cabinet on that point. In terms of, so essentially essentially the Environment and Sustainability Committee doesn't monitor planning conditions, planning agreements being implemented. So I'm going to turn this over to Andrew Tyrrell, who's our Head of Public Protection, who can give a bit more fuller answer on that point.
Thank you, Councillor Nissen. So just as background, Mr. Short, I'm actually a qualified planner as well. So it would be useful for me just to let you know that there is specifically the local plan committee, and they consider these things, but on all planning policies in the local plan set a benchmark that is a minimum expectation. So regardless of any land sales, changes in developers, changes in plans, they would be expected to meet that. So I think I can give you some assurance that the environmental standards that have previously been set would continue forwards. But if you'd like some more reassurance, then the committee that you should attend is the local plan committee, and they have a similar have your say facility, so you may want to look into that, and we can provide information to you about the dates, or it's available on our website.
Well, you are the Environmental Committee and you should have expertise and input on these matters. I know that nobody can influence the Planning Committee itself. It's guaranteed by certain rules and regulations, and I will be coming to the Local Plan Committee. However, I have to say that in the past, the Planning Department and the Planning Committee does not have a good record of upholding conditions laid down by inspectors. I wouldn't draw yourself to the Alumno development, so I'll not mention it here. But I feel uncertain and unclear that the planning officers will seek to meet those in both the letter and the spirit in which they made the conditions. And I would hope that this Environmental Committee will be looking over their shoulder and providing advice.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Before you disappear, I'd like to just come back briefly. Okay, thank you. Respect that, absolutely fine, thank you. One of the remits of this panel is to make recommendations to Cabinet, and I will make sure as chair of this panel that I raise this at the next Cabinet meeting. It's not an agenda item, however it's a valid and very, very important topic, so I give you my assurances. I will do that. And I would like to extend an invitation to you to come with me, accompany me on the 11th of October to that Cabinet meeting to have your say there as well, if you would be interested to do that. Up to you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, pardon me. We also now have Kamal Chufolu, if you'd like to address the panel. I think you know what you're doing. Do you need me to reiterate the rules? Thank you.
Now, yes. Dear members of the panel, today I'm before you on behalf of Pesticide Free Essex. As you may recall, in my last appeal to the panel back in June, I asked 5 specific questions for the panel to consider, including what incentives can be put in place to support residents who would like to have their streets pesticide free. Unfortunately, I must express my disappointment and dissatisfaction with the way my inquiry and appeal were handled by the panel. To this date, I haven't received any communication from the ESP, which was promised and reassured by the chair herself. After waiting for more than a month, on 8th of August, I contacted two officers who were present in the June meeting, informing them that I still haven't heard back from ESB and that I'm still waiting for a full review and response. Following this, out of nowhere, on 24th of August, I received an email from the Customer Information Team saying they received and registered my Freedom of Information request and designated it to an officer. On 18th of September, on the deadline for receiving a FOIA response, I received a rather poor, incomplete and inconsistent response which had conflicting statements with ESB responses. If the panel can grant me an extra minute, I will be happy to share the inconsistencies between the responses I received. As pesticide-free Essex, in addition to ESB, we would like to receive a review and feedback from the portfolio holders of neighbourhood services, communities and environment and sustainability regarding prospects of introducing hand weeding schemes. Litter warriors and little picking hubs have been a huge success, and we would love to have it replicated for weed picking as well. In the meanwhile, I would appreciate it if the chair and relevant officers could advise me and direct me to the right complaint or monitoring officer or mechanism regarding the way ESB dealt with my inquiry, as I would like to ask for a formal review and response. Our activists and concerned residents spent days coming up with alternatives and appealing to you with recommendations and solutions. For that, we deserve a proper review and response. On behalf of Pesticide-Free Essex, as well as residents and activists concerned about climate and biodiversity crisis, I should also express my disappointment that the ESB meeting back in July was cancelled, and I hope this never happens again. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to respond to some of those points, and then I'm also going to ask Rosa Tanfield to address them. So I have in front of me the minutes of that meeting, and what was agreed was that you would send through your report and a response would then be provided following that. I have today been trying to ascertain whether or not you had sent that detail through. I understood that was not provided following the the June meeting of Environment and Sustainability. I understand from the submission you've made just now, you have had some further contact with officers. So I believe that there may have been a small misunderstanding there, which I do apologise for. I take responsibility as chair for that, and my apologies to you and also to Pesticide Free Essex. In regards to with regards to the three portfolio holders that you have identified, the communities, environment, sustainability and planning and neighbourhoods, I'm going to ask that we follow up with them and ask them to contact you as well. But I can see Rosa gesticulating to me, so I'm going to stop talking and allow her to add in. Thank you.
So if it's okay, what I've really picked up on is your expression of let's enable residents and let's support communities to do the right thing and to help Colchester in reducing its use of weed killer, etc., which is absolutely fantastic. And I think, without having to speak on behalf of the panel, I think we would wholeheartedly support that. So you mentioned about litter warriors, which does fall within my remit as waste. But through the work that we did over the last year or so, we have extended sort of litter warrior type activity to weeding and a bit of hedge cutting and that kind of stuff in local areas. And actually, if you go onto our Litter Warrior website, there is a section within there where you can click to get gloves and bags, etc. So that is already there, and individuals can take on that action in their local communities. But what I would also share is if you want to do something more wider scale, as in groups of local residents wanting to take a bit more action, a bit of a cleanse day or a bit of a community day, do get in touch with your ward councillor, councillors, but they can then contact my team and we will come out and help support that kind of local community action, and where possible, which we have done in other areas, we will contact other organisations, charities, businesses even, to see if they will all, to step in and step up and do some community activities collectively. So my advice really is to talk to us if there are things that you want to do in your local community that stops the use of weed killer. We will, by all means, try our very best to help you and assist you and enable you to do that. I do know of an example within Colchester where the local residents in a street have come together and collectively have contacted Essex County Council and have asked them to stop weed spraying in their street and have agreed that they will take full responsibility for weed management. So there's another example there of action that local residents have taken within Colchester that, again, we would connect you with the right people as well. And then lastly, I've seen a copy of the response to the FOI, etc., and apologise if the way that you've had, or your responses haven't been sufficient enough. Again, if you want to come and meet with us, come and talk to us, because actually that exchange of information face-to-face, questions and answers, we'd be very happy to do that. We've been working really hard on a greening Colchester policy for the last 3+ years. There's so much to learn. There's lots of new technology, lots of new chemicals, etc. coming on board. We're forever learning, but we are very much leading that across the UK. And we actually have lots of other local authorities contacting us, asking how we're doing and what we're doing, and they're learning from us. So we're not always going to get it right, but we have to try to do the best thing. And as we start to do things, you start to learn. So yeah, that's my response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosa. Kamal, would you like to use your further minute to respond on any of those points?
I would, thank you. I would love to have a meeting with you guys, and I've been referring to achievements happening in Colchester across Essex, and I was supporting residents from Frinton and Walton, and they convinced Tendring and Essex County Council, and now they are trialling non-glyphosate herbicides. And yeah, I am a proud defender and supporter of achievements in Colchester. I just believe there is more that we can do. If you can pass me your contact details, I would love to meet and have further chat. Anything else? Yep, I would still appreciate if I can get a response for the recommendations that I forwarded. It included 3-year plan and resources from Pan UK. So yeah.
Could I just double check, who did you send those to, if you recall, please?
I sent them to Ben Plummer and let me just quickly check.
Of course.
It was the climate. Just a sec, please. Apologies. I believe it was the. Where I have it.
Kamal, perhaps, pardon me, Mr. Ciufolio, can I ask you to forward them to me, and then I can make sure they get circulated and actioned internally. It's steph.nissen@colchester.gov.uk.
All right, thank you.
And it's on the website, but that might just be a bit more expedient. Get it to me, and I'll get it moving internally.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you for your contributions and for your work on glyphosates in Colchester.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so that is the end of the Have Your Say speakers. I just want to do a quick check of the public gallery and see if anybody else wants to contribute on matters. Nope, okay, that's fine. I have 2 speakers for the Ferry Marsh item, which is item 7, which we will now move on to. So we have been provided with a report which is recommending Cabinet make some changes to the Ferry Marsh Nature Reserve, item 7 in the papers pack. And I am going to ask Fiona Shipp to address the panel with regards to this report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to bring this paper to you this evening. I think we've got a great opportunity here with Ferry Marsh Nature Reserve. For those of you who don't know, it's over by the River Colne and Wivenhoe town. It's an area of land that Colchester City Council took on in about 1999. It was much more of a dry marsh area at that time. But over time, there's been a lot more flooding events. Sorry, a little bit louder. There we go. There's been quite a lot of flooding events that have happened on this site. Now, there is a pipe that leads from the site directly into the River Colne, but unfortunately it has a tendency to get silted up with the tidal nature of the river there and needs unblocking. For many years, the Environment Agency managed that area and managed that pipe and were able to carry that out regularly. Due to changes in the management of that and the changes in the sluice pipe itself, that now basically over the years got so that it was getting blocked up, and then we were then having to go in and try and clear that out at quite a lot of expense. But what we found during that period is because the site had gradually become wetter, we were getting more and more species coming onto that site. In about 2010, we actually did some work with Essex Wildlife Trust and actually did some ditch management in that area to try and improve the habitat for waterfoals in particular. And with the site becoming wetter, it was making access more difficult through that as well. Now, what we're proposing with this paper is that what we would like to do is actually try to continue that situation so that we actually manage it much more as a wetland marsh area. And by installing actual water control measures on the site, we can actually manage that much more carefully. At the moment, it's sort of uncontrolled. But if we can put proper measures in place, we can make that much more controlled and keep the levels of water at those that we want them to maximise the benefit for nature on that site. Something else that we need to do is to do some work to the pipe, the outlet pipe, because at the moment water is coming in off the local housing estates into that site, but we aren't able to get it out very well because of the blockages of that pipe. So if we can extend that pipe further out into the river, we can hopefully reduce the amount of silt going into that and the blocking up. So what it will mean is, ironically, we'll be able to keep the site wetter, but when we have a flood event, we'll be able to get the water out. And it will mean that we won't have such large fluctuations from a dry site to a wet site to a dry site, which is really not great for the wildlife in that habitat. We need to maintain a sort of stasis in that habitat. So that's one of the things we want to do. The knock-on effect of this, by making this site wetter, is it makes it harder for access to the site. And what we're proposing is to close off one of the main paths through the centre of the site to basically mean that when we do the water management on the site, if that is approved, that we can actually restrict access to improve the area for wildlife. So there'll be much less disturbance from humans and from dogs going into the water in those areas, and much less disturbance to breeding birds in that area. And other wildlife too. We will of course still maintain the path that goes along the top of the riverbank and loops back round to the Wivenhoe Trail as well. So what we're also proposing is to put in an alternative small path that links to the Wivenhoe Trail so that people will actually be able to go a little bit into the reed bed and get a feel of that and feel what that looks like, and have a bird screen there that we'd like to install as well to give people an opportunity to benefit from hopefully we're going to create in that area. I've worked in conservation for about 30 years, and it's really amazing I think to have an opportunity where we can go in and make some changes that are going to have a really positive impact. The site is already a site of special scientific interest, and with these changes we actually do have a real potential to get this site into a favourable condition. Anybody who's ever done any work on sites of special scientific interest, you'll know that often we're in unfavourable conditions and we're fighting really hard across the country, all of these sites, to get them into better condition. So this is a really rare opportunity, I feel, to generally be able to achieve something like that in the future. So obviously this is going to have an effect on the local people around this area in particular, and any other visitors to this site, because it will change where they can access the site. So because of that, we carried out a consultation in December 22 and January 23. We had 4 drop-in sessions where people could come along. We had a really good attendance, 217 people turned up to those. And also we had an online survey as well, which ran for 6 weeks, and we had another 170 people who responded to that as well. So we had really great local engagement and obviously an awful lot of local interest in this site. 70% supported protecting the biodiversity of the site and then modifying the access to help to achieve that. and 65% of people supported further water control measures as well to help to achieve that too. So we were very pleased with that. So there are several measures that we want to take forward. So we're asking for the Cabinet, we're recommending that this be taken to the Cabinet to get approval, hopefully, from the capital programme, so that we can look to extend the pipe so that we can manage the water levels more consistently from any flood events on the site. Is one of the things, and hopefully take forward a recommendation to carry on with all the other works that are suggested in this paper. We do hope that the more minor works in the paper with the bird screen, the new area, the path into the marsh, that we'll be able to fund those within our site budgets over the next few years. There's some further work to do. We still need to get formal permission for Natural England, although they have been involved in the whole of this process as we've been moving through this and coming up with these suggestions, as have Essex Wildlife Trust. I think that's the main things that I want to say on this. Thank you.
That was absolutely fantastic, Fiona. Thank you very, very much for that thorough briefing. I'm very grateful to you for that. And congratulations on your first appearance at the panel. So I have two members of the public who want to speak on Ferry Marsh in particular. I'd like to invite those two speakers to come up first before the panel then discuss and debate. So Jane Black. So you've got 3 minutes to speak. I'll then invite an officer to respond, and then you'll have a further minute to sum up afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name's Jane Black. I'm speaking on my own behalf, but also what I'm saying was endorsed by the committee of the Wivenhoe Society. Now, there are two main issues.
Pardon me, could you pull your microphone a bit closer? Thank you.
Sorry. There are two main issues: public access and what the water level should be. Now, on public access, when the council acquired the site, it signed a covenant which said that the council thereby covenants with the transferors for the benefit of the remainder of the retained land as follows: not to use the property otherwise than as public open space. Now, to my mind, public open space means a space that is accessible to the public. And for well over a decade, the residents of the retained land and other people in Lower Wivenhoe greatly enjoyed walking across the marsh, which was part of a round walk, including the river wall, which was already a public right-of-way, by the way. It's the only space that was given for all the housing development that took part on the old port, and it's the only space where you could walk on grass and you didn't get harried by cyclists behind you. The only other space in Wivenhoe for which this is true is Ferry Marsh, where there's a public footpath across the marsh, but this is liable to be flooded post-2025. Now, the survey did not ask directly the question about whether the public supported the closure of the path across the marsh. A path accessible, a small accessible loop in the area most remote from the housing development is a poor substitute for the path across the marsh. It is true, and I'll agree with this, that people and dogs can disturb birds. A compromise is needed. Retain the mown path, require people to keep to it, and require dogs to be either banned or kept on a lead. In principle, before, the whole of the marsh was accessible to the public, so this would in fact involve reducing the amount of accessibility. So it's consistent with the answers that many of us gave to the survey. On the water levels, I would certainly agree that a permanent fix for the sluice is required, and measures to maintain the water levels in the ditches are desirable. But the report does not say what the suitable level of water is, and there are concerns that Rowhedge Ferry Road, which is the track which runs alongside the marsh, might well be flooded if the water level is above the level of the ditches. As regards providing, sorry, I'll let finish can I finish? Very briefly.
Very briefly, yes, please.
If you want to make habitats for such things as grebes, then a more sensible solution than keeping the water level artificially high on the marsh would be to dig some scrapes.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Black, for that. I'm going to ask Fiona to respond on those points, as there's a lot of technical detail there. Thank you.
Hello, right, I'll try and respond to each of those. I was hurriedly writing them down as you were asking those. So, public open space was, I believe, your first point. So, absolutely what you've said. However, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to maintain all of the paths that are there at that time. It's obviously highly desirable to have public access into a public open space. You're absolutely right. But where that access is not actually set or determined. If you see what I mean. So it doesn't necessarily have to be where it is now. It could be in another area. Is my understanding of that. I believe there is still a circular walk. We're still planning that you'll be able to do a circular walk around the site, although of course you won't be able to do sort of a double loop through the middle, which I do appreciate it is a change to that. We're not closing the path or suggesting that we close the path just for the sake of closing it and trying to exclude people. We're actually trying to enhance this public open space. And people enjoy public open space, not just for walking, but obviously it's a fantastic landscape, for example, as you will well know, down at Wivenhoe, and just being out in the fresh air and being able to walk around that also. We're actually doing that to try and improve it for wildlife. And actually we have an obligation as owners of that site to manage the site of special scientific interest and do all that we can within our powers and our resources to try and improve that as best as we can and then maintain that. The water levels, I understand your concerns about that, and that is put in here as the next piece of work, that if it was approved at this stage or by Cabinet, then we would look at that and we'd be bringing in experts to work with us on those water levels to ensure that we get those at the right level and we're not putting anybody at any additional risk. In fact, managing the water levels, I hope, will actually give us a lot more control over the site and actually make it safer from that point of view.
If you'd like to come back, Jane, thank you.
You haven't mentioned the fact that there was this covenant that it should be for the benefit of the retained land, and having a very small loop rather than having a round path does not seem to me to satisfy the covenant. And the fact that you can still do a round walk is not actually an additional benefit because the public footpath was already in existence, as was Old Ferry Road. So the only additional benefit to the residents of the retained land of your proposals would be that they would have a very little loop around one part of the site.
So the provisions of the Constitution do require that we offer the 3 minutes, then a response, then a further minute. I'm going to suggest that the panel note the comments and concerns of Mrs. Black this evening, and I think there is scope for further offline conversations to happen there to take your concerns into consideration. Thank you for addressing us this evening. So next I have Rob Neve. Again, 3 minutes, a bell will sound after 2, then an officer will respond, and then you'll have a further minute to address the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I speak just as a resident of Wivenhoe for 18 years. 14 of those years, I enjoyed that walk across the marsh. It's not a prime reason for me moving there, but to take it away is, to me, wholly silly. And it's silly for budget reasons as well. To put the sluice right is correct. That must be done, that's urgent. Nothing else needs to be spent on that marsh. It worked very well as it was. We're all very happy with it. It's just that the City Council seem to have this idea that it will be improved for wildlife. Well, there are other sorts of wildlife other than birds. There are reptiles and everything else that enjoy that space, and if it's flooded completely, it will possibly undermine the railway. We're very concerned about the railway and the fact that the water will be lapping against the embankment there, which wasn't built for that. But and also the Ferry Marsh, the Ferry Road, the old Ferry Road, that's very low. And when it was flooded, the Ferry Marsh was flooded, that was flooded as well. So I fully support, and we want the idea of additional sluice or sorting out that sluice. But to do anything else is quite frankly a waste of money, because we don't need it. It worked very well as it was. It should continue as it is. And that path should be opened again, albeit I accept dogs will have to be on the lead or anything like that. But it works perfectly well as it is. It doesn't need improvement other than the sluice needs to be sorted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neve, for that contribution. I'm going to ask Fiona to respond on your comments there again, please.
Hello, thank you for your comments. Absolutely, I'm sure that you've loved using that site. What we're proposing is to try and enhance that site. So I appreciate that you don't feel that, but you know, from the research that we've done into that and the surveys we've got, we do feel there is a real opportunity to enhance it from a nature perspective. So that's what we're trying to do, and that's the purpose of that. But I appreciate that that may not be your opinion.
No, it's most definitely not my opinion, and it's not the opinion of quite a few other people as well, because I back Mrs. Black in that the right questions weren't asked in that survey. You got 70-odd% saying they'd support enhanced wildlife, but we didn't say if we block off that route and stop you using that, do you support that? So I just want you to consider, please, the budget implications. We've already heard tonight that the council is hard up. Why spend money on something that doesn't need money spent on it, other than the sluice needs to be sorted? Thank you.
I'd like to invite Councillor Cox to speak, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your contributions there. I don't represent Wivenhoe, but I used to live in Wivenhoe, and I know that area very well, and I use the river path. I think there's a balance to be struck, isn't there, between public access and enhancing biodiversity, and it's a conversation that's quite a difficult one to have. But I think one of the things that's happened in recent years is that the biodiversity of the site, as I understand it, has expanded and increased, and that is something perhaps that wasn't foreseen when that covenant was drawn up. So things alter, right? So I think it's that the enhancing of the biodiversity and the modification of the public access represents an interesting way forward on this one, I would say, and it's a choice to be made on this. So I would support it going to cabinet.
My apologies, I pressed the wrong button. Sorry, Councillor Cox. Councillor Gocher, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I tend to echo what Councillor Cox has just said. There's a balance to be struck, and I think that there is still a route there. But I'm just something to quickly pick up on. I failed to pick this up in the briefing, but when it talks about creating bird screens, can you maybe just explain to me what kind of bird screens we're talking about and what the purpose is? Because obviously I have an idea what it might be, but could you clarify, please? Thanks.
Fiona, thank you.
Basically, it's just a small wooden screen. So basically, so normally for bird watching, you might build a bird hide. Hopefully everybody's familiar with what that looks like. So basically it's just like the front of a bird hide, where you would have a screen that you could stand behind, you wouldn't be seen, but it would have holes or a slot that you could look through. So the idea being, as you approach into the marsh area, that you can not be as seen by the wildlife, not disturbing it too much, and actually then still be able an opportunity to be able to have a peek through and have a look and see what's there.
Thank you, Fiona. Councillor Gocher, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, that clarifies, and I think it's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your contributions. Yeah, I mean, everything's a compromise, isn't it, really? But I am slightly concerned about the covenant, because I don't think we've had a really clear answer as to whether it does exist. and whether we might potentially be breaking it. So I would like to make a suggestion that if we are minded as a committee to accept item 2, recommended decision, that we caveat that with that we will recommend it to Cabinet on the condition that the Cabinet report includes, obtained either internally by our own people, lawyers, or externally, a clear opinion or clear information, A, whether there is a covenant, and B, whether the decision might be breaking it. Because I think when Cabinet make that decision, you know, we are a local authority, we do have to be careful that we don't start making decisions which are breaking covenants. I know covenants are difficult, but our position, we have to dot the I's and cross the T's. So when they take their decision, they know whether the decision they take might potentially be breaking an existing covenant or not. So they're making that decision on facts.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. I'm going to return back to that when we've finished the debate, but that is noted, and thank you. Councillor Scott-Bittell.
Thank you. I'm all for enhancing our public open spaces. As Mr. Carter will, well, he knows I'm always nagging him. I've drilled down into I'm looking at the financial implications, and there are some things that I would like clarification on. I mean, implementation of the above steps will rely on budget being available, part of which will be funded through the countryside team's site budget. So that is set in stone. We've got that's good to go. Then we're talking about the extension of the outlet pipe at a cost of 46,000. That is going to be decided by Cabinet. And I guess some of that hinges on the recommendations that come from this panel as well.
So it's somewhat subject to the capital programme as well. So
yes. So I mean, as we know, we're having to be very, very careful with funding and financial implications. I'm also looking at I'm interested as to why did the Environment Agency step back for the maintenance and inspection of the river wall and path? They used to manage that, so why don't they now? And it looks like there's going to be, to actually fully deliver what is proposed, we're going to have to look outside for funding, and bearing in mind, A, how much, ballpark figure, roughly how much, and how successful will the applications be, because money's tight for everybody. So, as I said, I really welcome any enhancement of public open space, but I'm kind of asking for a clarification and just double checking on a reality check.
That's
Thank
really
you.
helpful. Thank you very much, Councillor Scott-Bittell. Fiona, are you okay to respond on those points? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I understand your question about the Environment Agency, which is totally relevant. My understanding in this area that they've moved back from that, particularly here, because I believe you've got a newer flood defence system on the River Colne. Can I just look at my colleagues behind me? Is that right? The flood barrage. I'll just use the right terminology for that for this area. The flood barrage. So that's meant that the they basically only are maintaining up to there, and they don't feel the need to maintain any of those other areas. And I believe the Environment Agency are pulling back from a lot of sluices and weir and river wall management across the whole country. Obviously, they've got reduction in funding as well, so they're looking very carefully at what they can and can't maintain. So there's a lot of people now who are having to take on additional management of these kind of resources.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I get the comments about a balance being struck, but I'm also concerned that it's actually mismanagement of the site which has led to sort of the accidental creation of this wonderful wildlife reserve, is what it sounds like. I'm very keen on wildlife enhancement. I've done it. I've got a reasonable size of garden with a reasonable size of pond, and I've actually got waterfalls in that. I'm very keen to see wildlife mosaics across Colchester. What I am just concerned about, I've met Jane Black on a number of occasions, certainly through the local plan process, and I know that she and the Wivenhoe Society I think of them as people that really are the voice of Wivenhoe. They understand what's going on within Wivenhoe. And if she says that there was a covenant that this was the planning gain effectively for the public from the development of the port area, it seems quite unfortunate that we're now removing that public open space because of mismanagement, or what has been mismanagement of the site. And it means they're going to lose something which is obviously quite dear to them. I agree with Councillor Dundas that if we are going to recommend it to Cabinet, it does need to go with that caveat that there is a covenant. I'm not sure of, I mean, we've got Andrew Tyrrell here, he may be able to tell me whether that is a legal planning obligation. I'm not sure that as a panel we can ride roughshod over that. I've just had something handed to me. I'm not sure that it's our place to ride roughshod over that. And I just, whilst I'm very keen, as I say, to see habitat created, it shouldn't always be at the expense of public open space. So I just think it needs looking at quite carefully. I'm keen to see it, but I don't like something being taken away from people if it was a planning obligation. I'll do that for the time being.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ellis. I'm going to ask Andrew to come in on that point specifically. Thank you.
Thank you. So the short answer, Councillor Ellis, is that the covenants are covered in law, and the council would have an obligation to comply with that. And I'm sure from past experience that we would look very carefully at that if we haven't already. So that would, definitely put the recommendation on for Cabinet to consider that. And if it hasn't been considered to date, it certainly should be in the Cabinet report. I don't know enough about the details of what's been looked at before. I don't know whether any of the officers are here able to answer that, but the covenant would have to be met, and we'd have to look at the precise wording of that and what the obligation on the council was.
Councillor Ellis, do you have a supplementary?
Just to come back, thank you very much indeed, that's really helpful. The other thing just to point out is that the answer you get from surveys depends on the questions that you ask. And one of the points made this evening is that people maybe wouldn't have responded in the way that they did had they known that they were going to lose access to the site. So maybe that's another lesson to be learned. If we're going to consult with people to say, would you like to see this happen to the site, that we should be telling them what the consequences of their answers would be, or was that already in the survey and that's been misreported by residents this evening?
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Fiona, did you want to respond on that?
I'm actually not able to respond on that because I didn't personally attend the consultations, because I've only been with the council a couple of months, so I would have to ask somebody else to get further detail on what exactly was asked and why. But we have included some of that in the appendix of the questions and the answers that were given to that, so there is a bit more detail in there.
Thank you very much. I think that all the points that are being raised so far are really valid and very useful contributions, and I just urge the panel to remember our remit is to make recommendations to Cabinet. So if the panel sees fit, we will be making that recommendation to Cabinet. It will be their decision to take. I just want to remind everybody of that. So I've next got Councillor Rippingale to speak, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have several concerns about this report in the sense of the concerns that have been raised by residents. In terms of Councillor Ellis's point, one of my questions would be, have alternative arrangements for the site and plans been submitted to consultation? So obviously we've offered a solution to access to the site, but have we explored every possible access that could happen to that site? Given the challenges of the council's budget as well, I would be disinclined to approve any recommendations to Cabinet based on the fact that we don't know where this funding is coming from. I think it would be imprudent of us as a committee to approve anything that we are not sure where the funding is coming from. So I would propose that we go away, relook at this and actually identify, one, the costs, and two, where this funding would be coming from. Because my concern is the impact on the open spaces for the rest of the city. Already we know the challenges of maintaining the open spaces that we already do have. And I know that's a particular challenge in Newtown and Christchurch as well, you know, and I think that I would want to make sure that this isn't done at the impact of our other existing open spaces and then the impact of other residents. So if we are going to have to go out to partners such as DEFRA and those types, I would want us to be very clear on, one, how much this is going to cost and what funding we do actually require and what partners could potentially supply this before we move forward with this plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rippingale. I'd like to invite Fiona again to respond on that, please. Thank you.
So the parts of the paper that aren't costed up, the reason they're not costed up is that they're actually fairly low cost. So things like putting in the bird screen, the other path, are things that we can do ourselves in-house out of our current site budget. It's not a massive site budget, but we are able to do that within that. The one thing that I would perhaps agree that we don't formal costs for yet is we would need to carry out some formal survey work to get the levels right on the site. Actually, when it comes to installing it, there would be fairly low cost system to install the sort of planks and weir system that we'd need to do for that. So there wouldn't be a massive cost, but I don't have the exact cost of that. You're quite right. I think it would be the survey that we would need to look into for a price for that. That's perhaps the unknown in this at the moment. And obviously we know about the pipe because we've already put the cost of that forward.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Councillor Rippingale, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, it's actually, that's not the case because it does actually say no additional funding has been identified for taking on the management of the Crown Estate lands. So I would be keen if that is something that we wish to pursue, which from what I can gather from the report, it would enhance the experience for service users. I would be keen to understand where that additional funding was coming from as well, because I can imagine the ongoing maintenance of that land is a cost that we're not entirely sure what is, how long and how much maintenance that's going to need. So I would be keen for us to identify the challenges there.
Fiona?
You're absolutely right about that. We're not actually asking for a decision about the Crown Estate land as part of this paper. What we did is we asked about it as part of the consultation because we were keen to gauge public feeling about that area and whether that was something that they would be supportive of or not. There's been no decision to take on that piece of land at the moment. It's just been us looking into whether that might be something we might want to look forward to possibly into the future. If that was the case and we want to move forward with that, then there would be a separate paper and separate pricing and probably another consultation, I imagine, about that as well. So that would be a separate thing.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Councillor Rippingale. I'd like to turn to Councillor Scott-Buttel, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Rippingale, for picking up, because I didn't get an answer to that question, and that's what I was indicating that I wanted to talk to. I'm nosy. I like to know how much things are going to cost and where we're going to get the finances from, and you're right, Kaylee. It will have impact if there's only so much money in the pot, and if that money is taken for one thing, there's going to be other areas in the city that are not going to have the funding. So it's something that we have to weigh up very carefully. I do know of a source of funding, which is my secret squirrel thing, because I love a source of funding, which I'm quite happy to talk about with Rosa and the team, because I think there is some potential there for some funding. I think Mr. Carter knows about it, and I'm waiting for a response.
To clarify, Councillor Scott-Buttel, are you expecting a response from David at this moment, or later.
Oh no, I'll let him off the hook this time.
On behalf of the panel, that's much appreciated. Councillor Powling.
Yeah, it's interesting listening to all this because, you know, the Environment Agency itself, Mersey had one of the best seawalls to walk around. It used to be able to walk around the whole island. Then they decided, and there's one sentence here just to ask you on, is that the best one was down by Cooper's Beach, lovely concrete wall, one of the best on the island. They then decided that they're not going to maintain it anymore. They actually broke it up to allow the sea to penetrate and then flood for biodiversity. And they've done that in a lot of areas around. One of the questions just here, because the Environment Agency must get rid of them, that's the trouble. It says the district funding may be sought for the ongoing maintenance and the inspection of the river wall. Is the river wall part of the long walk round that you're intending to keep?
Yes, that is.
So if the Environment Agency has got the intention of what they did on Mersey, down East Mersey, which was a perfectly good, one of the best maintained walls, to say, well, we're going to get rid of it, the access could go, if they decide they're going, because it says it doesn't maintain it, who does maintain that? Because maintaining sea walls, I'm sure as you're aware, is incredibly expensive. We could do with a lot more on Mersey, to be honest. That's, I'm sorry, I'm playing, but the Environment Agency wanted to get shot of the walls because of allowing in wildlife and birds, etc. If the main walk is what you're going to rely on, is what's left, suddenly gets breached and gone, where would the cost come for that? Sorry.
So I appreciate that's a really helpful analogy to draw there, Councillor Powling, and thank you for that. That's a very welcome contribution, but I think if we retain the focus on Ferry Marsh in Wivenhoe, and possibly there's a further conversation to be had offline between Fiona and yourself about the seawall in Mersey, because that's a really important point as well.
It was just the fact that the Ferry Marsh wall is the perimeter walk, that as the middle bit seems to be coming out, that's the one they're going to rely on, so the public open space walk will completely go if that was to breach. That was my point, sorry.
No, I appreciate your contribution and thank you. Fiona, would you like to come back on that?
It's my understanding, I say that carefully from my short knowledge of being here, but it's my understanding that that wall is in our ownership and thus we are liable of that asset.
Councillor Powling, have you got a supplementary you'd like to ask or raise?
No, it's fine. It was just that question on that because they are very expensive to maintain those. That was all. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you very much. Panel, can I see any hands if there's further contribution? Councillor Summers, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I note here it says that one of the risks with the bird screens is that it may attract antisocial behaviour. Have you any previous experience where this has happened, or is there currently any antisocial behaviour associated with Ferry Marsh?
There's not any that I'm aware of. I will just look to my colleague behind me in a moment because she's the actual ranger for that site, so she knows that much better than me. The only antisocial behaviour I was referring to with the bird screens is they do sometimes become a target for graffiti, and that's all that I was referring to there and nothing more sinister. I will just check, however, with my colleague. No other instances. Thank you.
Thank you. It's one of the antisocial behaviour-free areas of Rochester, so that's something in and of itself to celebrate. Can I see if there's any further comments from panel members at this time? Councillor Ellis, thank you.
I don't know if you're moving to proposing to accept the recommendation, Chair, but if you are, I think we need to look at maybe a counter proposal. I'm not necessarily the best person to come up with it, but I think from the discussion this evening that I've gathered from people is that there are concerns about costing potentially. There's concern about the covenant and the fact that it removes public open space, which may well be part of a planning obligation. And also there's concerns, I've got concerns regarding surveys and the way questions are answered, or are asked and answered, and whether you would have got the level of support that you think that you have from Wivenhoe had you let the Wivenhoe residents know or understand the consequences of their answers. So personally, I think I'd probably like to see this back with all of those questions answered before I recommended to Cabinet that they should make a decision on it, because we don't know those answers. You may wish to send it to Cabinet and say, all of those things have got to be included in the report that goes to Cabinet. I don't know, but I'm quite happy to have it back here again with all of those things answered before we make a recommendation to Cabinet. I'm not prepared to vote for it in its current form, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ellis. When Councillor Dundust raised his very valid query about the covenant and considering an amended recommendation to Cabinet on that basis, I wrote that down. I was thinking that would be an appropriate way to proceed if the panel would minded such. I think in light of further discussions, as chair, I'm minded to refer this back to the officers at this time to request it to be brought back to the next Environment and Sustainability panel meeting, and Councillor Arnold, I'll be with you in a moment. I'm minded to refer this back to officers to get those clarifications of details, but I can see there's some additional comments that wish to be raised. Let's try to be mindful of time and move swiftly on this. We're coming up to the 90-minute break, and also it's a 2-hour meeting. So Councillor Scott Boutel, if I could ask you to make the last contribution on this point, and then I'll come to Councillor Arnold.
Yeah, thank you. I just wondered if we asked for more, well, we would be diligent to ask for more details. However, I'm just wondering what the implications are if we delay things. Are things going to deteriorate further? Is it going to cause further problems? So I just wondered if we got the luxury of time, or whether if we don't go as diligent as we'd like to be, whether it's going to have further cost implications.
So one of the things that I would, thank you very much, that's a really useful contribution. One of the things I'd point out is even if the panel made the recommendation to Cabinet this evening, that's then subject to further ratification by Cabinet in the middle of October, and then subject to getting hold of the capital expenditure as well. So I'm looking at officers seated behind you. I'm seeing lots of shaking of head, but I would like to confirm with Fiona, please.
Yeah, I think there wouldn't be a problem with us going away and finding out that additional information. I think those are fair questions that we need to find out. For the main sort of part of remanaging the water levels and that side of it, we're not on a massive pressure timescale, so we've definitely got the time to be able to go and think about that and get the answers that you're requiring. The one thing we may want to consider perhaps is the sluice and the outlet pipe that we're requesting to be considered. I think that's probably the most urgent part of it, because that allows us to be able to get water off site if we have any kind of flood incidents where we've got a lot of water coming off the land into the site that we then can't discharge quickly into the river. So perhaps, I know you were sort of saying about a counter, but possibly that might be something that could be looked at separately. Perhaps go forward. I'll leave that with you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I mean, as chair, I'm obviously happy to take contributions and views, but I'm minded that given the sense of the panel that I'm picking up is that we need to get more information on this. I don't feel comfortable with suggesting that we agree a part of it in light of the circumstances we're aware of this evening. Fully appreciate there is that concern there, Fiona, but if we're talking about a month, maximum 8 weeks here, hopefully that, yeah, okay. Councillor Arnold, thanks, Fiona.
I just wanted to pick up that I would like to see the detail in the map form to see how much the public open space walk is being lost to the new proposed, and was that given to the residents, the new proposed walkways? Did they get a map or a picture of what was the plans, future plans would be? Thank you.
Fiona, sorry.
So I was just clarifying with my colleague who attended the consultations. So apparently, yes, that was up on large boards at the consultation with a map and the areas marked.
Wonderful. Panel, can I see if there's any additional comments that wish to be raised? Councillor Powling?
With the sluice part itself is the extension, I suppose, further into the river. That's not going to affect anything to do with the alterations to public open space?
Nope.
Lovely, succinct answer there.
Well, because of where we're from, we know how wildlife can be affected by times of being able to work, to be able to do these things. Actually, like the officer said, if the panel, I'd actually be quite happy to propose the fact of recommending the sluice works, if it doesn't affect anything else, and then go back to the rest about the covenant and that, because of how wildlife works, we know the troubles we have in our bit where we have to wait sometimes weeks and months to get it done. So I'll be quite happy to recommend that if it's not going to affect the open space part, if the panel is willing.
Thank you, Councillor Powling. Councillor Ellis.
I'm going to be a pain and support that. On the basis, actually, I'm happy that we defer the rest of it, but actually, that he has got, Councillor Powning's got a valid point. With overwintering birds and what have you, it's a triple SI for a reason, and we do have a large migration, inward migration of things like teal and widgeon and what have you, who will be coming in actually second moon of this coming month, October. And we'll be probably using that marsh, especially if it's flooded. So the sooner they get on with that work, probably the better. So I would agree with that part of it on the basis it doesn't actually alter the recommendation that we're making or looking to make, because it's only about controlling water levels, whether that's taking them all the way down to recreate a dry marsh or taking water off the marsh. So, and it could then remain public open space. So I think that part of it is actually a sensible thing for us to agree that they, depending on, I mean, if they're confident, again, it's probably a cabinet decision, is it, for the funding, that part of it, but I think the rest of it we do need more clarification on. I mean, I've got the note I was handed says the covenant is recorded with land registry under a title DDX 6306, so it is actually with land registry the title deed, that covenant. So I think that really does need looking into to make sure that we can be making a recommendation to effectively break a covenant, as it seems to me.
Thank you very much for that valid contribution, Councillor Ellis, and I don't mind saying that all this discussion about water levels is making me need the bathroom. So apologies for squirming at the top table. I would like to pick up on that and just check with officers, have we got the money to do that? If we make that particular recommendation this evening to Cabinet, can we afford it? Can we get it done? And will it be, if Cabinet says yes, can we crack on with that, please?
Hello. So in terms of the extension pipe, which is what we're talking about, which is the 46,000, we don't have the money for that. That is a request as part of the capital programme. So what I would recommend is that the panel makes a recommendation to Cabinet to include that piece of work, the extension pipe, £46,000 within the capital programme, which they will be seeing at their October panel. And therefore the sort of secondary or counter recommendation from the panel is then to review all of the other proposals around the changes to the nature reserve as set out in the report and to the points that have been raised. And then we can come back to this panel having done more work on those. And if I can just ask if we can, as officers, just consider which of the future panel meetings would be appropriate to enable us to have the time to do the work required.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Rosa. In that spirit then, colleagues, can I move to a vote on the recommendation proposed by Councillor Powling, seconded by Councillor Ellis and beautifully articulated by Rosa? All those in favour of the amended recommendation? Can you stick your hands up a bit higher, please? Okay, that's unanimous, that's carried. Thank you all very, very much for that fantastic discussion. That was really useful. I am going to invoke the 90-minute provision in the Constitution for a break. We will adjourn for 10 minutes and return back here. Thank you very much. Welcome back. It's still Thursday the 21st of September, it's still the Town Hall, and it's still the Environment and Sustainability panel. We are moving on to item 8, the Woodland and Biodiversity Project. So we have been given a wonderful report detailing the progress that has been that's occurred over the last 5 years, and I'm going to ask, officers are all, wonderful, thank you, someone's volunteering. I'd love to hear from David, so if you'd like to update the panel on the report, thank you very much.
Thank you. First of all, this is the first time I've been here, so I'm actually really proud to be here because giving an update on year 5 and what we've done on 4 years of Woodland Biodiversity project is really good because I was part of that project team from day one. So it's really good to look back on what we've done, what we've learned, what's worked, what hasn't worked, who we've worked with. We've took criticism in the past, we've worked with new partners, and it's been a big learning curve as we go. But it's really produced some really good outcomes. We've looked at, obviously, from originally of just tree planting in year 1. We got feedback and some criticism, so we then learned from that, working with some of our local community groups like CNHS, Essex Wildlife Trust, Woodland Trust, and we've changed the principles of the project as we've gone over the last 3 years. So we changed from tree planting, we changed the name of the project from Woodland Project to Woodland and Biodiversity Project, and focusing on communities, wildlife and the environment, with our key principles of not harming existing habitats, using natural processes as far as practical, having a balance of needs for people and nature, collaborating, consulting with communities and partners by some of the groups I've already mentioned, who we're now still working alongside, and also allowing others to take part in the project, and also using what we've learnt to pass that as a bit of a legacy over to other groups, town and parish councils who we've been working with. The Woodland Biodiversity Project's been nominated for awards, which was a really good achievement for the project. In 2003, we had 425 volunteers come out in that season of tree planting. It's been a real success. We've changed our grass cutting regime to help biodiversity to long grass areas, wildflower areas. Some have worked, some haven't, but we're still learning from that. We're still improving, and we're still putting new methods in to try as well. And so the sort of previous 4 years has been a learning curve. It's been a really good one. It's been really successful. We've been working also with volunteers, schools, town parish councils, volunteer groups, businesses, and we are going to continue doing that into year 5. So our specific aim for year 5 is really focusing on 2 areas. One is continuing funding for trees, and we've been successful again in the local authority treescape fund to provide some more replacement trees, which will be going in this season, and also then focusing on year 5 for our Cymbeline project, which is removing agricultural land into a nature reserve for wildlife and biodiversity. So this is working with the tenant farmer who is on board for the future management as well. We're still in the early stages, but we had the plans up at the Eco Festival, which was really well received. Archaeological works are nearly complete on site. All our plans have been shared with a number of partners like the CNHS, Essex Wildlife Trust, English Heritage, RSPB. So we're taking all these people with us on this journey and getting them involved as well, and continuing. So even though we're in the final year of the Woodland Biodiversity Project, the Cymbeline project will be incorporated into our normal working projects over the next sort of 3 and 4 years. We hope to start planting on Cymbeline next year, towards the end of the planting season, and again with the whole of the 4 years of the tree planting, it'll be getting communities involved, schools, really to promote what we're doing, but also just get people involved. People love being out planting trees. They've come back saying this is why we're here. They might come and plant 2 or 3 small tree whips or a big tree. Why did you do it on that site? Well, that's actually where I had my wedding photos done. And it was actually really good to hear stuff like that, of what people were coming back from. And some people, it's just moved to the area. It's just nice to get out, meet the community and do something for our open space and for the Woodland of biodiversity of Colchester. So yeah, final year 5 of the project, but it's not the end of the project. There's always a legacy for it. It's changed how we do things, and it will continue to change probably how we manage and do things in Colchester to improve biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for that excellent first presentation to the panel. Councillor Scott Bootel, would you like to come in there?
Thank you. David, I'm really reassured to hear that you've learnt and not moved on, that's the wrong way of saying it, but the first 2 years I felt were really, really target driven. You know, we said that we would plant 200,000 trees? That is a heck of a target, and I think mistakes were made there. There were a lot of mistakes made there because the trees, the whips were going out, they were being over. There's a small area of land, and a community group took 1,000 whips, and there's no way that 1,000 whips would be planted. There was a mature hedge taken down, and out of the 1,000 whips and rabbit guards, I think about 20 have survived. So, you know, that was a big learning curve. And actually, I'd like to see more checks done when we've been giving out trees like that, because that wasn't a community project. Stanway residents actually paid for people to plant them, and they weren't looked after. So that was a big learning curve. So I really welcome that we moved on from that. Wildflowers, as we know, we're learning from that all the time. And I did fire off an email about removing the grass cuttings on the wildflower areas, because they will mulch down, feed the grass, and we'll end up with even denser grass in Stanway. So I'm really pleased to see that's been looked after. And it's new to us, and we are learning. And yeah, I think that's where I'll start off with. I'll probably come back with another 2 penneth if the chair will allow me. Oh, and David, I'm still waiting for my lavenders for the tree for years. And sorry, that was the other thing I was going to ask. Are we still going to continue doing trees for years?
Yes.
Moving on from Councillor Scott Bootel now, thank you very much. I have Councillor Dundas.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It's interesting. I know it has been a learning curve, hasn't it? This. I think when it started out, there was I don't know if you use the word naive, because I think we all perhaps thought that everybody loved trees. Well, it seemed that they do all love trees in a sort of abstract way, but they are quite fussy where they go. And I know there's been problems. I can think of a number of sites where they haven't been quite as popular as, as perhaps we anticipated. But actually, I think my Councillor Scott Bootel, to a certain extent, answered my question. I know in the early years when we gave out number of trees, we weren't really too sure what happened to them. But I think that perhaps also applies to even some of the more recent issuing to some of the town and parish councils. What monitoring are we doing when they go out? And we've got a lot of town and parish councils in Colchester. When we give them trees, or we have a joint project with them, what monitoring are we doing to ensure that they actually end up as trees? Because I'm not going to name any names, but there are 1 or 2, I think, perhaps, which have planted them, and that's been the end of it. And there might be a few sticks sort of sticking up in the ground somewhere, not doing a lot.
David, would you like to come back on that? Thank you.
I think we can put some control measures in for future trees which go out, whether it be through our Trees for Years packs, which do go to some town parish councils, and I believe some of the trees which you're talking about, I think, came from a grant from the Woodland Trust and were given out. So yeah, we can certainly put a bit more control measures in, and similar to how we, certainly on our LATF funded trees, where we actually get money for their maintenance as well, and to cover pruning and watering for the first 2 or 3 years, we actually have to report back with a photograph of the tree every year. So it might be we can actually ask for something similar, so we then get that proof and evidence back that they're still alive or in the right location.
That's great. Thank you, David. And I wonder if I could give you an action to follow up and let the panel know at some point in the next couple of months the control measures and the clarification on that. Thank you very much. Councillor Gocher, please.
Thank you, Chair. A very pleasing report. Thank you. Last year, I did get quite a number of public concerns expressed about watering of new trees. I haven't had very many this year for reasons we can all understand this summer. But I'm just wondering, for public record, if you could just tell us what the survival rate of new trees has been over the last year, because I suspect it's been very high. I'm very pleased to read about the tree guardians. I'm just wondering what tools are available for people who want to become tree guardians. It mentions the tools in the report. I'm thinking, does it involve watering tools or pruning tools? But what kind of tools can I advertise people might want to get hold of? Very pleased to read about in point 522 the no-mow butterfly signs. I think that's an excellent idea. The more we can get on our council land, the better, I think, because we do need to educate people about no-mow May. And change perhaps perceptions a bit there. So I think that signage is an excellent thing. I can think of a number of sites I'd like to stick one, but yeah, excellent. Just a couple of quick queries. Obviously it's now the biodiversity project as well as the Woodland project. So is there any scope? I mean, it talks about obviously the giving away of trees to enhance gardens. What about bird boxes, bat boxes? Is there any kind of way we can kind of maybe help people with those kind of things? Because obviously it's more than about just trees. And ponds. Are there any plans to enhance our pond infrastructure, if that's such a thing? Because obviously ponds are one of the main things you can do for biodiversity. Just a quick query. 5.25, I don't want to labour this one, but it's something I failed to pick up on in the briefing. It mentions use of herbicides for non-target insects, or the phrase non-target insects appears in there. I'm just wondering why we're using that language in relation to herbicides, which are about obviously killing weeds, well, so-called weeds. But why are we talking about non-target insects? Surely it should read just insects. Thank you.
David, would you like to come back on that point? Thank you.
Yeah, all right, if I start with the tree survival rate. Based on doing a sample at the moment of what we've basically over the last 12 months, we've been planting mainly select standard trees. And out of 88 trees inspected, 7 has actually failed, which we believe was to the weather we had last year. So that's basically a failure rate of 8%, which generally is recognised there will be a 10 to 20% failure sometimes on new tree planting due to environmental conditions. So that's actually been quite good success. Tree guardian tools. So most of the tree gardens maintain areas where there have been whips planted. So they will get a selection of tree canes, biodegradable tree guards, and a mallet and some gloves. And it's really, their role has always been to, while they're walking in their open space for exercise or walking their dog, they're straightening up either wind-blown or damaged trees really by replacing the stakes and the guards and canes. As far as I know, there hasn't been requests for anything else, but if there was, yeah, we'd certainly look into it. For the bird boxes and bat boxes, I know our volunteer rangers, the Countryside Volunteer Rangers, do actually have in the past, and I think they still do, produce bat boxes and lead events up there. So I think if anyone is interested, they can be directed to our website for our Countryside team and for the events that they're doing. On the ponds, as part of the Cymbeline project, there are some areas earmarked for wetland improvements. So the whole point of the Cymbeline project, it's not just a project planted with trees, it's a hub of biodiversity from wildflower meadows to wetlands, naturalisation areas, a bit of tree planting, some coppiced areas, and access for the public. The point on the non-target insects, I think that's referring to the cartoon gold, which we do use, which is a non-glyphosate herbicide used on control of weeds on shrub beds. And I'll actually put the information sheet here of cartoon gold. Obviously, it lists various things on there, from wildlife to bees, aquatic life, soil and groundwater. And basically, the non-target insects is really there is a small risk to drift depending on how the spray is applied when using a knapsack sprayer. A lot of the advice there is actually for tractor motor sprayers, which we don't use anyway.
Thank you very much, David. That's fantastic. Councillor Gocher, have you got any supplementaries on that?
No, thank you for that, David. That's clarification, and I look forward to the Cymbeline Meadows project. It sounds great. Thank you.
Myself and Councillor Summers and some others were really fortunate to go and visit Cymbeline Meadows last month. It's absolutely beautiful. It's going to be a great piece of work. I've got Councillor Summers and then Councillor Cox. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and it is Cymbeline Meadows that I would like to talk about. Just wonder, it says obviously archaeological trenching has been carried out over the areas which are for tree planting. What were the results?
So the archaeological works are finishing this week, and what they've found is the foundation of some brick kilns which were constructed in Roman times and probably used for the construction of the bricks for Colchester. They were believed to be on site, and they've actually found them. So it does affect our plans a little bit, but not too much. So in good practice, we are just going to be rejigging the layout of the tree planting, not to affect the archaeology, which will actually be interpreted on site in some form.
That's fantastic. Thank you, David.
Councillor
Summers? Yeah.
Well, are you going to rebury them, or are they going to be, as you say, reinterpreted? Will there be anything visible for people to see, or is it just going to be a on this site type?
I think they will be reburied because it will have meadow grass on top. They are quite shallow from the surface, so there is options going forwards. But as it stands at the moment, I think there will be a meadow glade through where the trees were going to go. We have plenty of photographic evidence, and that will be used for interpretation panels for that site. So as you're standing on a certain spot, you'll be able to see what we found and also an impression of what it would have looked like just under 2,000 years ago.
Thank you very much, David. That's really exciting to think about our history coming to life again. Councillor Cox, please.
It's just a brief point, Chair, if I may. I think this is a really interesting and useful report, and when we had a pre-meet, Kaylee and I beforehand, thinking this is just a very, it's great to see the progress that's being made in a fairly short time, and how the public attitudes are changing on these kinds of things. I mean, no mow May, these kinds of things, and in a week when we've seen a bit of a rowback on commitments around climate change, it's good to see Colchester City Council is continuing to lead the way. I do one last thing, Halloween bat boxes, good opportunity for public engagement.
Thank you, Councillor Cox, that's noted, and I'm going to that with Democratic Services to take that idea forward. Thank you. Councillor Ellis, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's actually, it is a really good report and it's a really good project, and I'm thrilled that it's been so successful, albeit with a stuttering start, David. I just wondered one of the things I was wondering is how you see this going forward, given that you're in year 5 now of your 5-year project. It would be a shame, I think, to lose all of the experience and the knowledge that you've gained over the course of that 5 years. What are we going to do with that as we move forward in Colchester? Because actually, if we're not funding things as an authority in doing it, how could, maybe we are going to continue doing it, I don't know. But if we're not, how can we do something to encourage the public to pick up and use what we've learned, whether that's educating the public in how to do things. But it's really important that we do create habitat mosaics through Colchester. Councillor Goach is quite right. Ponds are probably the single most important thing at the moment. We've lost huge numbers of ponds across this country. So if we could encourage people to even put an upturned dustbin lid and they keep water, that's probably too shallow, but something within their gardens, if you can encourage people to have some sort of water within their gardens, how do we encourage people in Colchester to create, and have we done any work on, certainly we look at we've got the Colchester Orbital and we look at how we can create wildlife corridors through Colchester, but are we doing that with members of the public and their gardens? And how can we help them to help wildlife and green the borough?
Thank you very much, Councillor Ellis. David, can you respond on those points, please? Thank you.
I think even though we're sort of coming to the year 5 of the project, so sort of technically the end of the Woodland biodiversity project, what we're doing is incorporating a lot of what we've learned and what we're currently doing for our practices into our day-to-day work and day-to-day management of our green spaces in the borough. So reducing our sort of the amount of grass we cut on a sort of monthly basis to once a year for wildflowers will continue. There'll be more of that. Our website provides loads of information for people about what we've done in the Woodland biodiversity project, but how they can be involved as well. We continue working with the Wivenhoe project for the areas they've done for wildflowers. So it's the Cymbeline project as well. It's going to take several years for that to develop on site, which will always be engaging with the public. So even though the project's sort of coming to that 5-year end, it now becomes a bit of our normal working world, really. So there will always be bits which continue, so we can keep passing that on.
That's fantastic, David. Councillor Ellis.
Just going to say, have we thought about how we can engage more with the public and encourage people to do more in their own spaces that they've got within Colchester? Because actually you can really make an enormous, I know from personal experience and friends who have started doing it, actually you can make an enormous difference by changing the way that you use the land that is your garden. Whether you have bits of formal garden or you rewild bits or what have you, you can actually create amazing habitat. And if everyone was to do little bits, you'll find that you do get that mosaic through Colchester, and we'll increase our biodiversity immensely. But you won't do that unless you take the public with you and get them involved in doing it. I've spoken to companies who would be interested in, there are people who would be interested in sponsoring, getting involved in that sort of thing if we wanted to do it. But I think we should take a lead on it.
Councillor Cox, is that a direct response on that point?
It's a direct response. I do think we as ward councillors have a response. We can create things in our wards. I mean, we down in Christchurch, Kaylee and I have done all sorts of stuff around, Kendal Folly, for example. So councillors can take a lead. It's not all on officers to deliver this, I think. I'd love to see a webcam of your pond, though, Andrew.
Regularly on Twitter, actually.
It is regular. There are lots of pictures on X. Sorry, Chairman. There are lots of on X. Yes, there are lots of pictures of what goes on in my garden. I can assure you. Okay. Sorry. Through you, Chair. What I was trying to say is, I think that because this is coming to an end, I just feel that there's an opportunity to use what we've learned as an authority to help the public not make the mistakes maybe that they might make. And I just want to feel that we might have a mechanism of passing on what is an immense amount of knowledge to help them help themselves and help us as a city. But I do take your point, Councillor Cox. We do actively encourage it within the ward, but.
So thank you very much for that, Councillor Ellis, and I'm going to look up the pictures of your garden on X as I'm very intrigued by that. I'm going to ask Rosa to come in momentarily, but I think there's a action to be taken away, officers to consider, and then come back to the panel at a later date, ways that we can take that suggestion forward, and thank you. Rosa.
Yes, thank you. So there are three aspects, or three ways actually, that we can work towards what you're describing there, which we've been working on over the last 5 years, but actually now gives us the opportunity to progress even more. And I've got to try and remember those three things because I had them in my head a moment ago. But the first one is around sort of social media and our website, and David's already mentioned there's quite a lot of resource on our website already, which we've been developing over the course of that programme. The second aspect is that within the greening team, there have been some changes. We've been really incredibly lucky just recently to secure some external funding for an education officer, where we're going to be doing more outdoor engagement pieces. And actually what we're trying to look at is part of our ranger roles is to not just about looking after our fantastic spaces, but increasing access and that education piece about what people can do in their homes. So that's something that we can definitely continue to work on, because it's an ambition for the whole of Colchester, not just Colchester assets as you've described. And what was the third thing that I was going to describe? Oh gosh, it's gone now. Oh my gosh, right, it's gone, but there were three aspects and it will come to me, but just to kind of reassure you really that is definitely something that we can continue to work on. It will be just in a different way from how we've delivered it through the project. That was it. The ward councillor aspect is actually what we could take away as an action, is to see what resources we can provide to ward councillors to encourage that activity, and also parish and town councils. I do know already that Wivenhoe, who we have reported on before, have done some fantastic work in their area. They have gone out and invited other towns and parish councils to come and see what they've done and use them as a bit of a resource. So we might want to look at as a bit of a package or a training session for councillors to help encourage that activity. And those of other organisations, it kind of comes back to my point earlier with the other have your say. If you want to do something in your local community, it's very unlikely we'll say no. We will try and find the best way of doing that. So it's kind of my open plea. That was the best point actually, but there you go. I remembered.
I mean, that's fantastic, Rosa, and I love that. Yeah, let's make that last action absolutely happen. I have Councillor Rippingale.
Oh, this is a favourite topic of mine. So I think the next steps for this project needs to go back to the ABCD model that we as a council have adopted, but I don't actually see a lot of action on, particularly around open spaces. As Councillor Cox mentioned, I obviously like to green random places like Kendall Folly, but I have hit a number of roadblocks in securing small pieces of land where the community wants to take over that space because they've been victims of fly tipping or mismanagement by our contractors. And actually, I think there's a real opportunity here in a space where we said we need to save money, that we're paying an external contractor to maintain some of these spaces, and where the community is willing to take on space. And I'm not even talking about huge plots of land. An example of one we've identified is at Winnock Road, and it's a very small area of land. It was possibly my own fault for having the bin taken out, but it's brought a community together where we can provide, greening opportunities, where we can be producing food, and the community is willing to take that space on. And I think there are a number of legal issues that we need to work through as a council where that is really slowing that process. And I think we have to be mindful of that cost of transferring that land to a community organisation or to the residents. But I think we as a council do put a number of roadblocks in place that actually slows that process, but also costs us quite a lot of money in terms of maintaining those spaces. And I think there's a real opportunity to work alongside the community enabling team here and the greening team to really develop this project going forward, is that actually in those urban wards, how do we enable those small parcels of land, or even identify areas where there isn't that opportunity to have that small piece of land, but also working alongside partners such as CBH, where, there's some pretty depressing car parks in flats where we could probably add to the biodiversity of our urban wards as well. I think this project's been amazing to awaken that passion, but I do think we can be so much more radical with this. And I know me and Councillor Cox are very passionate about this kind of work, so I think, and have done a number of work with community organisations like the Irvine Road Orchards, and they've match funded to be able to buy the lease of that. And it does show that if you empower communities, yes, we gave them a head start by giving them some of the Section 106, but actually we went away and said, you're more than capable of finding the rest of this money. Go away and done it. And they've done it in under a year. So I think we have to move away from where we say that you guys have to do everything, because you can't. You can't, in the best will in the world. But also I think we have to look at creative solutions where it can actually save us quite a lot of money because the community wants to engage, and then you get a lot less emails about people moaning that we haven't maintained an area, because you put the onus back on them. And there are people out there, and I think as ward councillors we have a responsibility to connect those people with you. I just think there's an amazing scope of work here that I would love to be involved with, to move this project forward, and how we move it forward into those urban wards and past its original scope. So thank you. Sorry, that's my rant.
No, I don't think that was a rant, Councillor Rippingell. I think that was, drawing different threads together and, sort of ties into some of what Councillor Ellis was saying. Rosa, I'd love it if you could give a brief response to that. And I'm wondering if there's I feel like I'm just giving officers more and more work this evening, but potentially there's an offline conversation to be had about scoping that, moving it forward.
So I'm just going to prerequisite what I'm going to say, because I'm not actually the head of that service anymore. I'm going to look at Fiona and others, and I hope that I'm not putting you forward for something that I shouldn't have done. But what you have described there is kind of an extension of what I'd started saying around kind of providing members and other organisations with tools, because it's a perfect example of what you've described there. So I wonder if, as you say, there's an offline conversation to kind of pull together some of these case studies, and how can we share those with others to start instigating that passion, that drive, that enthusiasm for those things. Completely agree with you, there are barriers, as you've described, and we've got to try our best to try and work through those as best and as effectively and as efficiently as possible, and make sure we don't break any rules. Sometimes it's difficult and we're not going to be able to get there as quickly as we'd like, but at least, demonstrate that we are trying to work towards that, and where there are the possibilities of quick wins, kind of what you've described there, if we can try and give those examples and enable people to get on with that, I think that's absolutely where we should be going. Hopefully I haven't put you guys in a difficult position there, but yeah, that's where we go.
Thanks very much, Rosa. Councillor Powling.
Yeah, it's been a great project. I know what Paul said about the trees. People love them till they might go and ruin their view. And then I know quite a few. A lot of them are down in my ward, actually. But and the watering thing was an issue. It did get rather dry. But I don't know if there's an opportunity. It's a great scheme. As you know, the large developments that have been going on, that they do have green areas that they have to sort of allow open space. Could the officers sort of, or could we as a council sort of encourage them or get them to work with us to actually put down these sort of community orchards and get it put in a Section 106 agreements that they have to do this with, I don't know if you can, this is complete, I'm not used to what this, but could that be done with the encourage officers and possibly gain, could there be an income to the council for that to encourage them to come for you to organise that sort of thing with them? With, you know, like community orchards and that, which are brilliant, which encourages all sorts of things. Is there an opportunity like that for it to encourage the schemes? So basically, you're getting the developers of the bigger schemes with the grounds that they sort of have to give to the offset for the environmental impact they're doing, that they have to follow the schemes that you've sort of learnt on.
Please stop apologising when you speak because you're making valid contributions and you're a welcome member of the panel. So I'm going to ask Andrew to respond to that really, really valuable contribution. Thank you.
Yeah, I think absolutely the scope. So we do have a local plan policy for biodiversity net gain now. There's also planning areas looking at things like biodiversity bank style models where a developer can't provide the greatest ecological value on their land. They can offset that by buying credits, and then you put all of that together to create larger and more impactful pieces of open space. Now, you've got some requirements in planning, like the geographical location. So you couldn't, for example, build houses in, well, wherever I pick now is going to be controversial, isn't it? In the west, and then place the benefit in the east. So I sold myself down the river there, didn't I? There's bits and pieces like that, and obviously pocket parks and bits and pieces like that, all small places do have value, but where you can create the networks, you can get the cumulative value and increase that. So if you did two things the same size but linked together, you'd get more than the impact of the two single sites if they're not linked together. So we can certainly look at that. I'm also thinking that we've got things like restorative justice and community payback, where I think one of the issues that was mentioned in Councillor Rippingale was clearing sites to allow communities to. I'm just wondering whether we can link in with that as well. And I think the lessons learned, as well as the education and engagement that we've already mentioned, there could be some CPD for planners, and we could also push that out to some of the developers to actually give our lessons learnt to those to increase the value of biodiversity on those developments, whether large or small. So I think there's a few bits there that we can take back, and it's all about comms and engagement and sharing the knowledge.
Thanks, Andrew. That's absolutely fantastic. I'm conscious of time. We're coming up to 8:30, so if everyone's okay to continue. Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Dundas and then Councillor Scott-Buttel, and then we'll look to move on from this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I'm conscious of the hour. I meant to mention earlier, actually, we spoke about the learning curve and how we've learned from our mistakes. Are we making that information available to other local authorities or others, either through the LGA or anything, who might be attempting a similar project, so they can learn from our mistakes as well? Because I think that would be a really useful information resource for other councils doing something similar.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. David.
So we're a member of Parks East, which is all regional eastern authorities. We meet quarterly and we discuss various things, and there's a number of councils who have been looking at us of what we've been doing through our greening policy, and they've tried different things, we've tried different things, and so we are in that sharing of information.
Rosa.
And if I can just add to that, we also delivered a presentation at the National APSI Summit a year or two ago, which is all UK authorities are invited to that. And we've also done a regional APSI as well, which is all local authorities, covering all of those aspects too. So we've been sharing lots beyond Colchester, and our name is getting out there because we often get the odd email or contact or phone call from other authorities wanting to understand what we're doing and learning from us.
Rosa, can I ask you just to clarify what an APSI and a NAPSI is, please?
APSI is this, oh gosh.
Association of Public Service Excellence.
Yes, there you go. So Association of Public Service Excellence.
Thank you very much. And lastly on this item, I'm going to take Councillor Scott Boutel.
No, Leslie's fine. Right, okay. I'm all for community enabling, but I think we need, if it's a large plot of land that's going over to the community, we need some checks in place, because there was a large, well, a fair-sized plot of land passed over to the community. They were told that they were responsible for it, but they didn't put anything in place about cutting the grass. So, you know, we need to have some checks there. If it's a tiny plot of land and it's 2 or 3 neighbours, but I think we could be making problems for ourselves in the future. So that's one thing. A bit of good news, and you guys there will like this. Stanway's now in ownership of a Woodland, which has a wet area in it, so we can work on that, and we're waiting for another very large piece of land to come over, which will have, I think, David, isn't it marshland in there that you wanted to develop? Country Park? Oh yeah, that one. Going back to what I was saying about the mad rush for whips, that sounds really bad, but you know, we were handing them out willy-nilly. The community group there did learn from that. And what they're doing now is they're making sensible requests, but what they're doing is they've been taking the whips and planting them. Stop laughing at me. You know, so what is actually planted is slightly more mature and stands a better chance of surviving. So that's really good news. That's the positive. The final thing, I think, are we mapping all our wildflower sites? Good. And are Essex County Council aware that we're mapping those and where they are, so that if a utility comes and digs them up, at least Essex can say this is a wildflower site and ask the developer, the utility to reinstate?
David, I'm going to ask you to answer that because I have no idea on those points. Thank you.
Yes, we update the spreadsheet with all our wildflower sites and share that with Essex.
So I'm going to draw item 8 to a close by saying that I think the panel has comprehensively noted the contents of the report. Thank you all very much. Item 9, we have a report from Ben Plummer on, Rose is moving again, on the Colchester City Council emissions, and I'm going to ask Ben to briefly introduce the item, and then I would ask one comment only, members, just in light of time, unless there's any serious issues for further discussion. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so this report details the council's emissions for financial year 22-23. I will caveat it from the beginning. To say that this is a draft figure for our emissions for 22-23, while we are still querying some energy consumption data for some of our buildings. So what the report sets out is the methodology for calculating emissions from our council operations and how we sort of account for those. So obviously the focus is on 22-23 and a pie chart showing the breakdown is provided, as well as a graph which I'm going to then, the one that's in the report I have since changed, and I'm going to go through that in a second about why it's changed.
The key thing that to make clear is that something that came to my attention, and this is an error on my part and no one else's part, about the misreporting of some electricity calculations. This applies to both this financial year in 22-23, which I've avoided it happening because I realised the issue. So there's no issue in this financial year. We're still in the draft, but there's no issue. It's on previous financial years where there's been basically an over-reporting of emissions associated with electricity consumption. This refers solely to an issue at one of our sites, which is called Leisure World. And this has 3 sources of electricity which are consumed at the site. So you've got electricity produced from solar panels that are on top of the roof, part of the roof at Charter Hall. You've got electricity that comes in from the national grid to supply the building. And you've also got electricity that's produced from a combined heat and power unit on the site. The combined heat and power unit uses gas. It's actually like a mini generator, basically. Uses gas as its input, and it produces electricity for use on the council site. That's quite important, as we get a much cheaper rate for the electricity produced from that unit than from the grid. It also produces heat as sort of a byproduct, which is used for heating pool water and things like that. The issue with what we were doing is how I report the electricity consumption. It comes in from our utilities service bureau, and it comes in. The electricity came in 2 lines for Leisure World, one for the grid and one for the CHP. I'd wrongly assumed that both the lines referred to grid consumption, and instead one was associated with the CHP and one was from the grid, and they have different emissions associated with the production of those. By doing that, I double counted the emissions produced from the electricity because the CHP uses the gas to produce electricity, which I'd already accounted for in the gas consumption for all our buildings. So I'd sort of essentially double counted it as being from the gas consumption and from the grid, and it's not from the grid. So that's why there was double counting there. So I've stated the amount that it should reduce by, basically, if I'd got it wrong in 22-23, the amount that we would have saved. But if we bring up the slides now, I don't know who's sharing those. Yeah. So this will just show. This just shows you what the difference is for the previous financial years as well from the CHP double counting. It varies per financial year depending on how much electricity was produced from the combined heat and power unit. So that's stated on there. The other thing you also see mentioned on there is it's not necessarily a mistake, but there is mention of T&D losses, which stands for transmission and distribution losses, which is losses incurred from where the electricity is produced to, so like miles away, to where it is used on site. There's electricity that's lost as losses through the grid, just in that transmission process. We weren't accounting for those losses in our calculations in relation to our carbon neutral target. So I've since moved those in there, and that's why it says plus X amount of tonnes for each of the transmission and distribution losses. So that is now accounted for. It's not something we're strictly in direct control of. The only way that we can reduce those losses is by generating more electricity on our own sites, basically. The other thing that's mentioned on there as well, so for financial years 2018-19 and 2019-20, there is no mention of any issues with solar, but you can see in the other years, 2020-21 and 21-22, I put an increase in emissions from solar. That sounds a bit confusing. The easy way to try and explain that is that basically the electricity generated from the solar panels at our buildings isn't something that's captured by our Energy Services Bureau, because it's not something that we're paying for. All the electricity we obviously do pay for. So essentially the impact of, by it not being included in the bills, basically, the impact of the solar's sort of zero emissions impact therefore isn't included either, even though it's sort of is produced. I'm not explaining it very well, but it's very difficult without me trying to show you on a spreadsheet. But what I'd been including was sort of saying, oh, if solar sort of my thought process was at the time was that if solar isn't included on the Excels, we're not including the impact that it's having in terms of reducing our emissions. So I was taking it off, not realizing that it's kind of already accounted for by it not being there, if that makes any sense. So hence why in the 2021, 22, I had to add on those emissions that I'd been taking off before when I've been doing the calculations. The only reason why in 2018, 19, 2019, 20, the solar isn't mentioned is because the Carbon Trust did the calculations and they did a lot better job than me at doing it. So I think what I was trying to do here is try to be pretty transparent. When I knew about the CHP issue, which is pointed out by another colleague in my team, I did a bit of a look back to see, are there any other issues with this? And I have looked back, and I think this does clear up all the issues. And what will happen is we will produce, once we've got the 22-23 emissions confirmed, we will produce a greenhouse gas report that will detail those on our website. And all of these emissions for the other previous financial years will also be updated as well and reflected in that greenhouse gas report, and that will be cleared up. But it's a very hard, I try to spend a lot of time trying to figure out the best way to explain it, and I hope it makes some sense. The rest of the report then goes on, the slides can be taken down now, I think. Actually, if you guys just skip one more forward, I think this is just to show the graphs, well, they've slightly changed basically. So you've got transmission and distribution losses added for each every year, and also the electricity emissions slightly changing as well. But obviously this will be reflected in the greenhouse gas report that's published. The report also mentions about just how the work on emissions is sort of going forward, that we're in the process of writing a carbon management plan, identifying measures to reduce emissions at several of our buildings. There's 2 grant funds, one from Sport England, one from government, that we'll be bidding into to help reduce emissions at a couple of our buildings. And it also mentions work that we'll be doing on carbon offsetting as well, starting that with Anthesis, who are a leading consultant in sort of providing work supports local authorities. They've developed a framework called area-based insetting, which is very interesting. I thoroughly recommend that people have a look at that if it sounds of interest. It's basically about promoting local forms of offsetting, which really supports local authorities, because traditional offsetting is really set up for the private sector and not really for our use. But yeah, happy to take any questions on what's presented there in the report.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Ben. And can I say, I think the wording in the report was very clear and helpful for those of us who are not as technically minded as you are. So thank you for that. And for the benefit of anyone listening at home or watching ahead at a later date, the papers do contain, which are available online, do contain the presentations which were flashed up on the screen this evening. So if you want to have a look back, you're very welcome to do that. I have Councillor Rippingale as our first commentator on this paper, please.
So thank you, Ben, for being so transparent and honest about the error. I'm sure the committee does appreciate that. Having experienced this report for a year and visiting today, I actually suggested to Councillor Nissen, when I originally looked at it, it would be really useful for the panel to have it broken down by the buildings, because actually there's a lot of information in here, and I think if I remember correctly, last year we were focusing on 6 key buildings where we were looking to reduce the carbon on those. I would really like to see the breakdown by year of each of those buildings to see the progress that you guys are making, because I think that would actually be much more representational for members to understand what those challenges those buildings are presenting, especially now that we've refurbished Rowan House and other buildings. I think this is great in terms of looking at all it totally, but I would really like to see that broken down where we can then make suggestions about those specific buildings or those specific challenges of areas, because otherwise this becomes quite an overwhelming task, I think, for those of us who are not as climate literate. So I had suggested that as perhaps to bring to the 6th of December panel, that's included into the report, because I think that would be really useful, and that's a challenge that I faced last year in trying to understand what buildings were causing those challenges. So that's just my point on the report.
Ben, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, that can definitely be done. We have got lots of it's all the data is obviously split up per building. I might not include every single one, probably just like several of the key ones, but you've got things like little public conveniences and things like that, which I might include under an other or something like that, so you can see the totals. But yeah, the key ones we can definitely do that. It's fine. Yeah.
That's perfect. Thanks very much, Ben. So yeah, if we note that for the 6th of December. Thank you. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. The first comment, that the gas generator sounds a bit interesting. On the face of it, it sounds a bit like me buying a heat pump for my house and then buying a gas generator to power it with electricity, but hopefully it isn't that, because it's rather pointless in some respects. But I've got some specific questions, particularly around the electricity CO2 figures, because we've got obviously a change each year on our electricity CO2, but except the solar and the gas generator, etc., a lot of that change comes down to changes in the generation mix on the grid. But what it doesn't tell us, and what, unless I'm being mistaken, the report doesn't tell us, is how much of that change comes down to anything CCC is doing, or how much of that change just comes down to changes in the grid. So perhaps what we do need to see is the actual electricity consumption each year of the council, because if that's actually staying static and we're not changing how we're generating it, then really we're not doing anything at all ourselves. It's purely down to what's going on externally with the grid, and we can't really take credit for it because we haven't done anything. My other question is, we all know that Leisure World is probably, I think it's still by far and away our biggest emitter. Out of interest, do we know how that compares to similar leisure centres in other councils? I know it's difficult because there's no two identical leisure centres, but I would guess we could probably make a fair judgment per pool, or perhaps a similar sized building, perhaps just on the fitness pool. I would imagine we could get the info as to our electricity or gas consumption to heat it, and really whether we're kind of in the top percentile or bottom percentile in terms of efficiency. And I was also going to ask the question about how we're judging the CO2 emissions of the hybrid cars. The thing with hybrid cars, as I've sort of found out, is that they are brilliant at giving great figures on the standard tests. If you pick up a brochure, particularly the plug-in ones, it'll tell you it does 274 miles per gallon and it emits 30 grams per kilometre. When you drive it down the road, it does 45. Now, it's difficult because we've only got the official figures to go on, but the reality is it depends enormously how you're actually using them. So you actually find the reality is on most cars, the CO2 in reality is quite closely related to how much fuel it uses, diesel or petrol, because there is a chemical reaction. So do we actually look at the actual fuel consumption we're getting out of these hybrids and ensuring that, you know, we're not getting 40 out of these, we were getting 39 out of the ones we had previously, in which case, if we're honest with ourselves, the chances are the CO2 and how we're using them isn't that much difference to the pre-hybrid ones. The other thing is, I don't know if they're plug-in ones, but what tends to happen with plug-in hybrids is people buy them and never plug them in, because they buy them for tax reasons actually, or just can't be bothered to plug them in. And all they do is do them off petrol. So they're not getting anything like the on paper emissions reduction. So it's just a question about how we're actually judging that and ensuring that, you know, it's been worth the investment really.
There's some really valuable comments and queries there. Thank you very much, Councillor Dundas. Simon, indicating to come in on that point. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just pick up first of all about the combined heat and power. So basically that is a gas-fired turbine which is situated at Leisure World, and that produces electricity. And the waste heat from that turbine is then used to heat the pool. So actually it's a really efficient use of power in that space. And then the company that owns that turbine then sells the electricity to us at probably a third of what we pay for the national grid at the moment. What was the second point?
It was quite a few, I think. But you had the point. Do you want to turn yours off? Sorry. So you had the point about the absolute electricity consumption value provided. We've got that, so we can provide that. I think that's a welcome point. I do for 22-23. I did mention about the amount of tons of emissions that have been reduced from the grid. I think it was 80 tons. So basically, from us doing nothing, like a BAU business as usual scenario, that's how much was just from the grid. We can continue to do that. But absolute electric consumption values, absolute gas consumption, we have that, and that can be provided for clarity and for those who want to dig in 100%. Oh, there was the question about the similar leisure centres. I don't know that we've done that, but Simon.
Sorry, that was the point. Yeah, we're carrying out a display energy certificate at the site currently, and that is then benchmarked against all other similar buildings of its type. So then you'll be able to visually see how that building performs. And the last one was about hybrid vehicles. So we use the standardised format for determining our emissions factors, which are provided by DEFRA, and use the factor for hybrid cars, but no further detailed investigation has been carried out into the actual performance of those vehicles.
So just picking up on that briefly, if I may, Simon, is that something that would be reasonably straightforward to do over a 3 or a 6 month period and then come back to the panel with that information?
With regards to hybrid vehicles, I think we could look into it. We've got very, very few hybrid vehicles though. But it's certainly something we can look into and get back to the panel.
That would be great. Thank you very much. Councillor Dundas, have you got a supplementary?
No, I think it'd certainly be interesting on Leisure World. I mean, we're always told that, you know, it emits a lot of CO2 and uses a lot of energy, but I don't know if that's just that we have a particularly poorly performing leisure centre, or we have to accept we haven't actually got a poorly performing leisure centre. That's just what leisure centres do.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. As a Castle Ward councillor and a resident of that area, I often remark on how hot it is when I walk past the building. So I will leave that in the hands of our capable officers. Councillor Powling, please.
But why is it one question is why you're considering the transmission and generation loss on the main transmission lines coming to the buildings? Because that's completely out. Because as you can imagine, depending how you're purchasing your power, is it coming from renewable energy, nuclear energy, or coal-fired? Because it's coming from some suppliers, only apparently it's all coming down the same grid. Because it's coming down the grid, it might be coming all from renewable sources anyway. So why are you even considering transmission loss that are beyond the control? I think you should be considering what's in the buildings. The other thing as well, you spoke about the fact with generation on solar PV that you're adding carbon. I'm a bit confused why you're adding carbon on, because if a building's drawing 50 kilowatts, you're generating 30 kilowatts, it will reduce that by 30 kilowatts, which means you're drawing in 20. If your building's generating more, it will push it back into the grid. So as a culture, do you actually get paid for what's being pushed back into the grid? Do your suppliers give you money back, which you can get? And some suppliers are actually paying up to a 17p for every kilowatt you push back into the grid. A place like Leisure World will be drawing an immense amount of power, and the combined heat and power is a brilliant way. It's a pity you don't own the generator and have it all yourself. They use it a lot in London, been using it for years. But the question is, a big view is why you're using transmission losses from the national grid into your assumption, because our responsibilities come from where the meter starts, not back beyond it. That's the grid. And it also depends where you're buying those resources from. And realistically, solar should be completely neutral, apart from losses within its own internal, if you really want to get detailed on it, which is very low. But do you actually get paid for what goes back into the grid? Because there should be ways with the monitoring of seeing exactly what goes either way with payments to yourselves.
That's really valuable. Thank you, Councillor Powling. I've just learned something there as well, so thank you very much for that. Simon, are you okay to come back on that?
So yeah, with regards to transmission losses, we are using, once again, I refer to the standardised format for greenhouse gas reporting, and we organise our greenhouse gases on an organisational financial basis. So therefore, we contract to purchase electricity from the supplier, and as part of that cost of electricity, we pay for the transmission losses that are attributed to that supply over the supply. So that's why they're included. With regards to solar, strangely enough, solar should be included as an emission. So effectively, it's not using any electricity, it's producing electricity, which is then sort of taking away from the electricity you would have been using if you didn't have the solar. And I think does that cover it? Was there another point there?
I was just saying, I know it's generating, but like you say, it's talking about the generation, which might go into the losses. But if you're pushing it back into the grid, are we getting paid for that?
I'm sorry, yeah, and with regards to the solar, we're carrying out a solar survey at the moment, but I do not believe that we've got a couple of sites that do have a feed-in tariff in place, but for Leisure World, that's certainly not the case because we just simply do not produce enough electricity from the solar panel at that site to be able to export.
Thank you very much for that, Simon. I've got Councillor Gocher, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for the report. Just a couple of questions. Obviously, one question is with regard to buildings, which we all know is an issue. Where are we with insulation? Are they fully insulated to the highest standard? Because obviously that's part of it. Because I suppose that's part of my second question. Why are we actually using so much gas? Because we all know that gas is a big issue, well, the biggest issue here. And with the decarbonisation of the electricity grid, with the growth of renewables, which is only going to continue its national direction. Why are we so reliant on gas? Is there any scope for moving more to electricity in the future for heating in certain buildings? Or is that impossible because of the nature of those buildings? Thank you.
I'm going to ask Andrew to come back on this one.
Well, to be short and sweet and to the point, I think if you look at the nature of the council's buildings, we generally own older heritage properties, and therefore the options are limited as to what we can do. So, Rowan House, for example, we've just put in air source heat pumps and got rid of 30-year-old gas boilers. At the town hall, that's not really an option.
Thanks, Andrew. If there are no further comments on this report, I'm going to ask that we note the contents of it, which I think it feels so silly to say that at the end because we have noted it, we've talked about it, but officially we've noted it. Let's move on now to our penultimate item, the Climate Emergency Action Plan update, which again is Ben, so if you can keep it short and sweet, that would be fantastic.
Basically, if you have any questions on the updates, then ask. I haven't got anything to expand on what's written, to be honest, so...
Councillor Cox, and thank you so much, Ben.
Okay, short and sweet. How is this action plan engaging with the Essex Climate Action Commission, and how do we move beyond an important but ultimately limiting focus on Colchester and CCC initiatives to questions that affect the wider community? So one question is, how do we engage with the work streams and special interest groups of the Essex Climate Change Commission? And I ask that because I was an observer to that the other day and was learnt a lot from it. And the other question is related to that. What's the scope for the team that works here on the climate emergency action plan to what's the scope for them to work with, say, the community enabling team on things like retrofit and insulation and things that residents need to perhaps some assistance with. And I'm minded to ask, where's the leadership from the portfolio holder on the environment currently?
Thank you very much, Councillor Cox. Ben, if you want to come back on that, thank you.
Yeah. So the first one about engaging with the Essex Climate Action Commission, I think it's a really good point. They do run a climate action anchors working group, which has like groups like us on it, University of Essex, NHS groups, other local authorities on there, and they've got sort of separate, they've got a whole working group and then separate subgroups that have set up around specific projects. So there's engagement there. I think you raise a really valid point there about Essex Climate Action Commission and the dissemination of Essex County Council's work. So they are actually doing a lot of work, but we probably, maybe it's our fault, maybe we have to be a bit proactive to get it, but they're not being particularly dynamic in telling us. I would say it because I recently looked at the Essex Climate Action Commission website, well, the minutes of one of their meetings. We never get told any of what happens in any of their meetings. And there was loads of interesting stuff that I got from actually reading like these update reports, really detailed stuff from officers, really great. I wish they'd tell us about it because, and to a degree, there's some things that they tell us more about than others. Obviously, things like transport projects, because the council has to work with Essex as the Highways Authority. There is that greater collaboration, but there isn't. There used to be a district and borough climate forum headed by Councillor Swear. That stopped. There's a local authority forum, but that's quarterly, if that. So that there's not lots of opportunities for us to hear that stuff and for Essex to provide it, but I think they should, because this is me giving them a compliment, because they're actually doing loads of good work. They just need to tell us about it a bit more. But there's probably a bit our side for us to find out a bit more as well. On the second point on retrofit, so we've got an officer in the sustainability team who is an energy efficiency improvement coordinator. So he mainly deals with energy efficiency grants and has managed to open up quite a few opportunities for residents who meet certain criteria to get access with energy efficiency support for their homes. He's also does presentations and pop-ups at different sessions, general sort of energy advice and support. So they were at one cultural delivery board meeting this morning, trying to work with sort of citizen advice to make sure that can get pushed out. So I think, and he has sort of previous links with the financial employment support team. So he does do quite a lot of work there to promote that support. And there will be information going on our website within actually the next 2 to 3 weeks about a couple of those grants and things like that. So keep your eyes out, and we will be obviously promoting that to councillors as well.
Thanks very much, Ben. And I think the last point that Councillor Cox raised is one for the panel to note, but I appreciate perhaps not a position for officers to form a comment on. In terms of that sort of dissemination of the information, I'm mindful that there's a climate summit on the 31st of October, which I've been invited to at Essex County Council. Ben, I'm wondering if we could get you to attend as well, or a colleague if you're not available, because it seems perfectly logical that an officer attend as well. I can try to make that happen.
Yeah, we'll try and make sure someone's there. Obviously, that one is just the biodiversity one. That's the focus of the topic. But yeah.
Now thinking about the email and trying to remember exactly what it said, but thank you very much. And I would look to officers to correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand the leader of the council, Councillor David King, does sit on the Climate Action Commission. Am I right? Yep. So thank you, Simon. So there's potentially some scope to get that information disseminated a lot more rapidly in-house. And if the panel's in agreement, I'll make that request at the next cabinet meeting. Thank you. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Firstly, just to compliment, actually, I think when we had this report in front of us at the last meeting, I was slightly critical. There were some projects in there which I know are under review, which aren't in there. So I think this is a much better, more honest report. Hopefully, I know next week we'll probably hear the results of the capital projects review. So hopefully a few can get put back in, which would be quite good, but we'll see. So thank you. It's a better report, so I'd like to compliment officers on that. My question actually just relates to the, well, actually up to September now, the 100 bikes in Grinstead. I just wanted to check what sort of monitoring we're doing to judge the success of that, and how sure we're not that they're not all sitting in sheds, garages, hallways, stairwells, or dare I say it, even on eBay, other selling platforms are available. Because obviously, in all seriousness, if they're not being used, it's completely pointless. So how are we monitoring the success of that?
Thank you very much, Councillor Dundas, and you forgot the option of the bike at the bottom of Councillor Ellis's pond.
That can be seen on Twitter, X.
On X, thank you. Ben?
So it's not a project I'm responsible for, but I do know, I'm pretty sure that there is monitoring on the bike, because I'm pretty sure that they were monitoring like where people were using them, like their like journeys and things like that. So I'm pretty sure they did incorporate that as like monitoring of that. But I can try and find that out from someone who's more closely involved with that project and let you know about that. But I'm pretty sure there's detailed monitoring, because they've been given grant funding, and with any grant funding you have to show how the success of a project. So yeah, but I can let someone know. Yeah.
Any other panel members want to raise a question, query, comment? Nope, that's great. Well, then I'd also like to offer my thanks to officers for this excellent update and the piece of work that's being undertaken in the wider plan. The last item on our agenda, you'll be pleased to hear, is the work programme. So I'm going to ask Matt to make some suggestions on this, but just to note that we will be bringing Ferry Marsh back to a future meeting as a result of the decision we made this evening. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. That's right. The suggestion I think that I would make is that the panel did request, as you know, that elements of Ferry Marsh are brought back at a date to be determined by officers. So if you're happy for that to go ahead, I don't think there's anything else unless I'm mistaken.
No, that's great, Matt. Thank you. Just a point.
It's just a suggestion for the work plan, but maybe you're coming to that.
So sorry, tired. One of the panel members did raise just prior to the meeting with regards to, on the 8th of February, we've got two items. We've got housing and sustainability and the climate emergency action plan. Question around insulation retrofit planning, whether that can be drawn out specifically and included. That would be great. I have Councillor Dundas, then Councillor Cox. Please.
Yeah, just briefly, as I know, all members of the committee will have had an email that the unavailability of some of the teams on the recycling and waste strategy, I think it's been delayed nearly a month because they haven't got people available. Are we confident that that will be ready to come to the meeting on the 6th of December, bearing in mind, I think it's now going to be sort of end of November, end of October, beginning of November before we have another meeting on it?
Thank you. I did pick that up with Rosa offline just to double check that. Yes, is the short answer. Thank you. Sorry, I was going to call you Pam. Councillor Cox.
Call me what you like at this time of night. I think the thing I'd like to suggest, with the panel's permission, is that we have an update on engagement with the Essex Climate Action Commission on either how we've engaged with it in the past, how we can engage with it as we move forward. Thank you.
So I wonder if potentially that could be in the December work plan, Matthew, but officers to advise at a later date if that's going to be feasible or not. Sorry, Councillor Dundas, did I speak it? Sorry, I'm losing it now.
I'm done.
You sure?
Yeah.
You can have another go if you want. Thank you. One thing that did occur to me just earlier when Kamal Chifoli was here earlier, he was mentioning about glyphosates again. Colchester City Council phased out glyphosates in April of 2020. So within this year, we would be coming up to the 3-year anniversary of that decision. I'm wondering how colleagues would feel about having a review of that potentially in the March meeting, if officers feel that's a good time, and kind of looking at where we're at, what do we need to do? I do love a good review, but I'll take comments on that. Sorry, Councillor Ellis, can you use a mic, please?
Sorry, I under my breath I said it sounds like they're still learning. One of the things I should have brought up, actually, when Kamal spoke, he was talking about tendering, undertaking trials, and I thought Colchester had been undertaking trials. where's the joined up thinking between authorities again there, that you've got tendering undertaking what sounds like independent trials of Colchester as local authorities working together. We ought to learn from each other's trials. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. Sorry, that was just something that I should have mentioned earlier but I didn't. But you've brought it up, and him speaking has made me rethink about it. I just wonder why we're not. Are we actually sharing information between authorities? Because it does seem stupid to be all of us to be undertaking separate trials.
No, I think that's a really, really good point, Councillor Ellis. Thank you. Can we stop it? Can we look at that for Fiona? I haven't spoken to you for at least 15 minutes. Can we have a look at that, and then can you feed back to the panel at a later date, please?
Yeah, no problem at all. I think we were just waiting until we'd moved on a stage so that we had some better positive answers to give people on where we're going with glyphosate and how that's been working, because it actually takes quite a long time to work through knowing what the effects of that are fully going to be after a few years, and particularly with a wet summer like this summer has been a real eye-opener for us. So we are still experimenting really. So I think we had just been waiting until we'd got some really good stuff to go back to people with. So we've got a really nice case study of where we are. So we'd certainly want to promote that and come back with it at a later stage. We'll discuss the timescales of that.
That's perfect. Thank you very, very much, Fiona. Would anybody like to add anything else to the work plan? Because I'm feeling generous after 3 hours of a meeting. No? Great. Okay. In that case, I want to thank you all for your time, energy, efforts, patience. Thank you, officers, for some excellent work. I haven't said you can go yet. Sorry, that's the teacher in me. Pardon me. I hereby draw this meeting to an end and wish you a wonderful rest of the night, and thank you.